Chapter 14:17. The whooshing sound kept ringing out. Gusts of wind swept across the sky, and the white clouds scattered, turning into wisps of heaven and earth yuan-chi dragons. There were countless flood dragons. It was as if tens of thousands of flood dragons had come to greet the flood dragons. Streams of heaven and earth yuan-chi and yuan-chi flood dragons came from all directions, colliding and exploding at a certain point. It was as if they were bound by an invisible force, gathering, mixing, and finally fusing into one. The first heaven and earth origin chi cloud appeared, and it suddenly reached 6 miles in diameter. Many Shark Clan and Sea Race people were gobsmacked. 6 miles! He's definitely a peerless genius of the human race. A human as such must not be allowed to grow. Many members of the oceanic race exclaimed in shock. This was a world where the strong were respected. When one's strength reached a certain level, one could slaughter an army of 100,000 or fight against 1,000,000 people alone. A peerless genius, after maturing, would become a terrifying existence. They could even directly threaten the survival of a large force. For a peerless genius who had matured, the human wave tactic was not much of a threat. The sea race was divided into low, medium, and high levels. The high level was equivalent to the nirvana realm of the human race. However, when the high-level sea race increased their strength, there would not be a change in the heaven and earth yuan-chi like the human race. Instead, there would be a change related to the sea. Therefore, when the heaven and earth yuan-chi appeared, it was quickly recognized as the nirvana of a human cultivator. Chu Mu had already expected that his 8th nirvana would cause a great commotion. This commotion would expose his existence, and the seafolk who were searching for him would find out. At that time, he would be surrounded. However, he had a feeling that even if the Oceanids knew of his existence and surrounded him, they wouldn't be able to do anything to him. This was because the dark sword steel would protect him. It was this feeling that made him feel at ease as he underwent his 8th nirvana. More and more members of the sea race were attracted, and they appeared in the sky above the heaven and earth origin chi cloud. They were densely packed, and there were high-level sea race and saint-level sea race expert. They were all staring at the heaven and earth origin chi cloud with ugly expressions. Damned humans! One of the sea race saint-level powerhouses was infuriated. He immediately attacked, thrusting his spear into the sky. Suddenly, a deep blue light transformed into a huge shark, carrying the might of a ferocious tiger as it attacked. Its momentum was vast, its power shocking, and it was incomparably ferocious. With a boom, the blue shark hit the heaven-earth yuan-chi cloud that was about 9 miles wide. The yuan-chi cloud shook, and the blue shark shattered, turning into countless blue water droplets that rained down like a rainstorm. Although the saint-level Shark Clan expert was unwilling to see the world's origin chi cloud being destroyed, he didn't attack again. This was because he and the other Shark Clan experts were well aware that in this kind of breakthrough, unless they directly attacked the body of the person making the breakthrough, there wouldn't be any effect. Attacking the world's origin chi cloud was merely to vent the anger in his heart. It wouldn't affect the other party in the slightest. Actually, this was not absolute. When some of the smaller heaven and earth origin chi clouds were attacked, they could also be shattered. However, the attack power needed to reach an extremely high level. The attack power of a mere saint was still very, very far away. The first origin energy cloud reached 9 li and 9 li in size. It stabilized, shocking the Shark Clansmen once again. 9 miles 9. What a decisive, peerless genius. The heaven and earth yuan-chi was still vast and endless. The second origin energy cloud took shape and rapidly expanded, also reaching the limit of 9 li. One by one, clouds of heaven and earth yuan-chi condensed and formed. 9 miles and 9 miles, 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 the Shark Clan warriors, Shark Clan saint-level experts, and the subsidiary clans were all dumbfounded. They were all numb. As soon as they raised their heads, they could see 8 huge white origin energy clouds that were 9 li in size converging into the shape of an 8-leaf clover. It slowly rotated, releasing an incomparably huge pressure. Incomparably violent fluctuations of heaven and earth yuan qi were like an invisible mountain pressing down on them, causing the pressure on the sea clansmen below to increase. It was as if an invisible mountain was pressing down on them. Those high-level Shark Clan experts sank into the sea. The seawater seemed to have been compressed into an iron plate, making it difficult for them to move. The Shark Clan Saint-level experts were also shaken. Those with weaker cultivations fell by dozens of meters, while those with stronger cultivations were able to withstand it. However, they couldn't conceal the shock and horror on their faces. 8 origin energy clouds of 9 li, the peak of the 8th sky of Nirvana realm. A peerless genius among peerless geniuses, a monstrous genius of the human clan. To be safe, when we see this person, we must immediately kill him, said a Shark Clan Saint-level expert in a low voice. This kind of person is too dangerous. We can't let him live. He's in the deep sea right under the origin energy clouds. Dive down immediately and kill him. A group of Sea Clan Saint-level experts took the lead, diving down rapidly. With a bang, they plunged into the sea, diving down rapidly. In the sea, the speed of the Sea Clan members was several times faster than in the air. At this moment, the clear blue sky suddenly flashed with stars one after another. There were more and more stars, and they became denser and denser. They blinked as if countless eyes were twinkling. Strange phenomenon, stars in the daytime. This is a bad omen. The Sea Clan experts who hadn't dived down yet were all stunned. They stared at the sky with their eyes wide open. They were absent-minded and their minds were frozen. Not only did they see 8 origin energy clouds of 9 li, but they also saw the strange phenomenon of stars in the daytime. In the records of the Sea Clan, stars in the daytime wasn't a good phenomenon, but a bad omen. As for what kind of bad omen it was, that was another matter. Following the appearance of the stars in daytime, streaks of starlight streaked across the sky, flashing and coming from all directions. Finally, they converged at the 8 clouds of heaven and earth yuan qi. Each streak of starlight was like a sharp sword, piercing through the 8 clouds of heaven and earth yuan qi, tearing them apart and shattering them. Then, countless rays of starlight shuttled back and forth, mixing with the shattered origin energy clouds. As they slowly rotated, they formed a huge nebula vortex that covered an area of several hundred li. The huge movement attracted the attention of the human clan and the other Sea Clan experts in the distance. They all thought that some kind of strange treasure was about to appear, so they all rushed over. First, it was the strange phenomenon of stars in the daytime. Now, it's the starlight tide. This person is definitely not a peerless genius of the human clan. He's a monster. A peerless monster of the human clan. He can't be allowed to grow. When a peerless genius grew up, he would become one of the pillars of a clan, threatening the survival of other clans. However, it was only a threat. After all, other clans also had their own peerless geniuses. They could resist and form a balance. However, peerless geniuses were different. They were far too rare. They were tens, hundreds, or even thousands of times rarer than peerless geniuses. Every peerless genius had the terrifying strength to cross realms and kill powerful enemies. Each of them had the ability to turn the impossible into the possible. Once they grew up, they had the ability to bring prosperity to a clan, but they also had the ability to destroy a clan. If they had previously thought that Chu Mu was a peerless genius, which made them feel apprehensive, then the conclusion that he was a peerless genius now made them feel terrified and uneasy. They couldn't even let him live for a second longer. He had to be killed. Immediately, the saint-level experts of the Shark Clan erupted with their greatest strength. Amidst the rumbling, it was as if they had broken through the void and smashed into the sea. Their speed increased by several times as they dived rapidly, shooting towards Chu Mu's direction like lightning. When all the Shark Clan experts had dived into the sea and formed an incomparably tight encirclement, the third strange phenomenon appeared. The sky lit up for no reason, and the pure white light illuminated the entire sea region. The creatures in the sea region were unable to open their eyes, and even the oceanic tribes in the sea were affected. They could not see anything, and they felt that they had nowhere to hide under the light. All of their secrets were exposed, and their bodies were so hot that they felt like they were about to melt. The blazing light quickly faded away, allowing every creature to breathe a sigh of relief. Otherwise, they would feel like they were about to be assimilated under the grand and majestic light. Before they could even breathe a sigh of relief, a smear of black spread out from the depths of the sea. The black light spread rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it filled the entire sea, covering the sea and the sky. Pure darkness enveloped all the creatures in the sea. They couldn't see anything. They felt like they were about to be swallowed by the pure darkness and become a part of it. Subsequently, the darkness also retreated. However, it didn't completely retreat. When it retreated halfway, light appeared again, illuminating the other half. Immediately, the third strange phenomenon appeared. Darkness and light each occupied half of the sky. The coexistence of light and darkness. What is this strange phenomenon? How can light and darkness coexist? Some cultivators who tried to comprehend it spat out blood. Among the Sea Clan in the sea, a portion of them were wrapped in light and felt like they were about to be melted. A portion of them were wrapped in darkness and felt like they were about to be swallowed by it. They continued to dive, but they couldn't find the direction. Even if a Saint Realm expert released their spiritual energy, it would be melted by the light or swallowed by the darkness. They couldn't spread it out. Unable to find the direction, they were like headless flies. Stars in the daytime. Starlight tide. Light and darkness, the three strange phenomena appeared one after another. The 8-9-mile-wide Yuan-Chi clouds turned into a several hundred-mile-wide nebula vortex. The vortex spun faster and faster. The power of light and darkness entered the vortex bit by bit. As they spun, they were drawn to the center of the vortex, where they would meet and collide. More than 1,000 meters below the narrow trench, Chu Mu had turned into a pile of flesh and blood. He was in the spiritual pool, waiting for the power of the vortex to descend. Chapter 14:18. In the vast and boundless blue sea, there was a huge sphere that spanned 700 miles hanging in the air. This huge sphere was a huge nebula vortex. It was formed from the extremely rich and pure Yuan-Chi of heaven and earth and the pure and vast power of starlight. It contained an incomparably terrifying energy. Even a saint-level expert would be shocked by it. The huge nebula vortex was constantly rotating, like an incomparably huge millstone that could obliterate the world. Light and darkness constantly converged and poured into the vortex along with the rotating nebula. Not long after, the entire nebula vortex became half black and half white. The nebula vortex that spanned 700 miles was a perfect circle. At this time, it had become black and white, with each side occupying one side. As the nebula vortex rotated, the black and white gradually stretched and finally formed the shape of a Tai Chi diagram. The huge Tai Chi diagram exuded a pressure that was even more majestic, vast, profound, and magnificent. The imposing manner of light and darkness was vividly interpreted. Even a saint-level expert would find it difficult to withstand such pressure, and would find it difficult to approach. The seawater below reflected the huge black and white nebula vortex, as if it had solidified like a steel plate. The high-level sea race people in the seawater could not move at all. Only their eyeballs could move. Although the sea race saint-level experts could move, it took a lot of effort to do so. The black and white nebula vortex continued to rotate. The black and white nebula gradually shrank towards the center, along with countless starlight Yuan-Chi. The 700 miles black and white nebula vortex shrank little by little. 600 miles, 500 miles, 400 miles. The black and white nebula vortex was getting smaller and smaller, but the pressure it exuded was getting stronger and stronger. It was constantly compressing and increasing. Even the Shark Clan Saint-level experts in the seawater found it difficult to move. Every sea race person who was under pressure was terrified. They could not imagine what kind of nirvana could produce such a terrifying vision and bring such a terrifying pressure. It made them feel shocked and desperate. At this time, their hearts were no longer thinking about killing Chu Mu, but how to get rid of this pressure. Although they knew that the pressure would naturally disappear after the nirvana, under the pressure, every breath that passed, they felt like they were going to be oppressed to death. It was incomparably uncomfortable, and they didn't want to stay for another breath. The black and white nebula vortex continued to shrink, and the pressure continued to increase. When the black and white nebula vortex had shrunk to an area of 99 miles, it was no longer possible to distinguish between black and white. They had completely blended together. There was black within the white and white within the black. Even though the 99-kilometer chaos vortex had shrunk to the limit, the pressure it exuded was more than 10 times greater than that of the 700-kilometer black and white vortex of nebula. The terrifying pressure pressed down on the seawater several thousand meters below, forming a basin with a radius of several hundred miles. Bang! 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 Some of the weaker high-level members of the sea tribe directly exploded under this terrifying pressure, turning into minced meat. Some of the stronger high-level members of the Shark Clan, although their bodies did not shatter, were still injured and in great pain. An incomparably sharp roar resounded for thousands of miles. At the center of the 99-kilometer chaos vortex, there was a dot of light. It was an indescribable light that had a feeling of eternity and immortality. The light was blazing, and it blasted down, forming a ray of light. The chaotic ray of light instantly pierced through the void, traversing thousands of meters in the blink of an eye, and shot into the blue sea. The seawater, which was as solid as a steel plate, could not stop the chaotic ray of light at all. Those Shark Clan experts who happened to be in the path of the ray of light, even if they were Saint-level experts, could not resist the chaotic ray of light and were directly pierced through. The chaotic ray of light was several meters thick, even larger than the bodies of the Shark Clan experts. When it shot down, it directly covered the bodies of the Shark Clan experts, causing them to be destroyed and turned into nothingness. They did not even have the chance to scream. In thousands of meters of seawater, more than a dozen Saint-level experts of the Shark Clan died under the chaotic ray of light. Hundreds of Shark Clan warriors died under the chaotic ray of light. Once again, there was a considerable loss. It could be said that from the beginning until now, because of Chu Mu, many of the Shark Clan warriors and Saint-level experts had died. The overall strength of the Shark Clan had declined by a lot. It had been many years since the Shark Clan had suffered such a loss. The several meters thick chaotic ray of light pierced through everything and finally bombarded the spiritual pool that was enveloped in darkness. The spiritual pool shook as if it was about to shatter. The power of the chaotic ray of light constantly fused into it, wrapping Chu Mu's shattered flesh and blood. The shattered soul began to reassemble. Under the clear consciousness shrouded by the divine light and divine light wills, it rapidly reconstructed, forming a more powerful and perfect soul. The more powerful the soul was, the greater the improvement of all aspects related to the soul. It constantly absorbed the power of the chaotic ray of light. The divine light wills and divine darkness wills fused into it, constantly improving and improving. After a period of time, an even more powerful and perfect soul was completely reconstructed. An indescribable feeling arose spontaneously. The flame of consciousness suddenly became stronger and burned fiercely. After the soul was reconstructed, the next step was to reconstruct the dantian. It was a walk in the park, and there was no difficulty. Not long after, a powerful dantian was also completely reconstructed. Traces of divine wilderness sword essence began to be nurtured within. After the soul and dantian were reconstructed, it was finally the body's turn. His internal organs, bones, veins, blood, flesh, skin and other parts were being reconstructed. An even more perfect body was gradually taking shape. The lower levels of the nirvana realm would undergo nirvana of the flesh and blood. The middle and high levels of the nirvana realm would not undergo nirvana of the flesh and blood. However, with every nirvana, the body would become more perfect and purer. In the sky, the chaotic vortex turned into the last chaotic ray of light and disappeared. The sky regained its clear blue color. There were no clouds in the sky for thousands of miles. It was clear and fresh like a new rain. The seawater also returned to its original state. However, the originally blue seawater was now dyed with a layer of blood red. That was the blood of the sea race warriors who had exploded under the tremendous pressure. The sea race warriors under the seawater felt the pressure that made them despair disappear. They all had lingering fears as they gasped for breath. It took a long time before a saint-level expert of the shark race reacted. "Kill, we must not let this human escape." With a roar, he took the lead and quickly dived down. The other saint-level experts of the shark race also moved down. The experts in the distance also flew over. Some guessed that it was nirvana, while others guessed that it was the appearance of a strange treasure. After all, if it was nirvana, it would be too shocking. A total of 3 strange phenomena had appeared consecutively. It was simply unheard of. At this time, Chumu, who had gone through the 8th nirvana, had completely recovered and become even more powerful. Traces of power surged in his body and jumped between his muscles. It was as if it could destroy the heavens and earth as soon as it erupted. Under normal circumstances, by this time, Chumu had completed the 8th nirvana and successfully advanced to the early stage of the 8th sky of nirvana. It could have ended. However, it had not yet ended. At this time, Chumu's spiritual world was undergoing a vast transformation. In the huge and sturdy spiritual world, the divine light will and the divine darkness will faced each other from a distance. Each of them condensed into a blazing sun. The bright blazing sun and the dark blazing sun emitted pure energy fluctuations. They collided again and again, causing Chumu's spiritual world to tremble. As they collided, the bright blazing sun and the dark blazing sun were constantly approaching each other. The closer they were, the more intense the collision became. It made Chumu feel as if his spiritual world was about to shatter. Finally, the bright blazing sun and the dark blazing sun were completely close to each other and collided. A terrifying fluctuation exploded, forming a ring of ripples. It caused Chumu's spiritual world to tremble, as if it was about to shatter. As they collided again and again, the power of the bright blazing sun and the dark blazing sun continued to spread. Chumu felt that if they continued to collide like this, his spiritual world would not be able to withstand it and would shatter. He had to think of a way to solve this problem. His mind spun rapidly. Various methods flashed through his mind, but none of them were practical. Suddenly, Chumu thought of Tai Chi. Tai Chi was divided into black and white, forming a perfect balance. After the 8th nirvana, his soul was even more powerful, causing his divine sense to be even more powerful. When he mobilized it, he first suppressed the collision between the bright blazing sun and the dark blazing sun, then guided them. It felt as if he was dragging 2 mountains, extremely heavy and difficult. Persevere, persevere, and guide. The bright blazing sun and the dark blazing sun continued to collide and move toward the undying sword soul. Otherwise, his spiritual world would shatter. Unleashing his potential, Chumu finally succeeded in guiding the bright blazing sun and the dark blazing Sunday. They slowly rotated around the undying sword soul, with the undying sword soul as the center. The power of the bright blazing sun and the dark blazing sun gradually spread out and turned into one. Under Chumu's divine sense, they slowly rotated around the undying sword soul, constantly approaching it. The first wisp of divine will of light and the first wisp of divine will of darkness came into contact with the undying sword soul. The undying sword soul trembled and immediately absorbed the two wisps of divine will of light. They were absorbed by the undying sword soul, and the undying sword soul began to undergo unpredictable changes. All of this was beyond Chu Mu's imagination. His original intention was to use his divine sense to guide the power of divine will of light and the power of divine will of darkness, balancing them so that they would not cause any damage to his spiritual world. It was purely an accident that they moved to the undying sword soul. The undying sword soul continued to absorb wisps of divine will of light and divine will of darkness. The undying sword soul began to change. As it absorbed more and more divine will of light and divine will of darkness, the changes to the undying sword soul became more and more obvious. Chapter 14:19. Countless figures gathered in the sky above the sea, where the primal chaos whirlpool had been. In the sea below, the saint-level experts of the shark clan dove into the water one after another, searching rapidly. Previously, with the guidance of the Nirvana tribulation, they could quickly find Chu Mu's location. However, they were helpless. Just now, they were suppressed by the terrifying pressure of the chaotic whirlpool and were unable to move, let alone find him. Now that the chaotic whirlpool had disappeared and the Nirvana tribulation had passed, the shark species saints were finally able to move. Without the accurate guidance, they could only know that Chu Mu was in this ocean region. They could lock onto a certain range, but could not pinpoint his specific location. A large number of shark race warriors spread out, searching in a certain range. It was better than searching without a target. Seeing the terrifying Nirvana tribulation, they were even more anxious to kill this human. Otherwise, there would be endless trouble. A portion of the shark race saints found a narrow trench and dove in from all directions. Although the trench was narrow, it was extremely long. A portion of the shark race saints quickly disappeared after entering it. Tiger Shark Lei Bao was a new saint of the tiger shark race. His cultivation base was equivalent to the first heavenly layer of the immemorial realm. He was a one-star saint. He had just come out of seclusion to consolidate his cultivation base. When he heard that the tiger shark race's Tigershark Zhan had been killed, he was instantly enraged. It had to be known that Tigershark Zhan had given him pointers. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Tigershark Zhan was half a master to him. He swore that he would definitely find the murderer and tear him to shreds. Tigershark Lei Bao's talent was outstanding. His strength was several times stronger than an ordinary saint of the same realm. His foundation was solid, and he could be considered a genius of the tiger shark race. His future was boundless. Being targeted by him wasn't a good thing. He continued to dive. Soon, Tigershark Lei Bao had crossed 100 meters of the trench and continued to dive. 200 meters, 300 meters, 400 meters, as he dove deeper, the pressure he felt increased. The seawater also became colder. He didn't have a treasure like the water avoidance pearl. He could only rely on his own strength to resist. When he reached 500 meters, Tigershark Lei Bao felt that he had reached his limit. He couldn't go any deeper. The deeper he went, the greater the pressure. The colder the seawater was, the harder it was to endure. Tigershark Lei Bao hesitated for a moment before continuing to dive. However, after diving for less than 10 meters, he was unable to continue because he felt that if he continued to dive, he would be injured. If one's cultivation was higher, they would be able to dive deeper. Just like him, the other saint-level experts of the Shark Clan all dived to different depth. Those with higher cultivation could dive deeper, while those with lower cultivation could dive shallowly. More than 1,000 meters away, Chu Mu, who was in the spiritual pool, had already ushered in the final change. In his spiritual world, light flowed on the imperishable sword soul like autumn water. It was a layer of chaotic light that seemed to be able to transform into thousands of mysteries. The divine will of light and the divine will of darkness were both displayed within it. The undying sword soul was being refined by the primal chaos from the inside out. Inside, the imperishable sword intent was constantly absorbing the divine will of light and the divine will of darkness. Using the imperishable sword intent as a medium, the divine will of light and the divine will of darkness were constantly being absorbed into the imperishable sword intent. A power similar to indestructible power, but at the same time more advanced than indestructible power, was born from this mutation. A new power was born from the inside. As the power emerged, it refined the imperishable sword soul and fundamentally changed the imperishable sword soul from the inside out. The divine will of light and the divine will of darkness were constantly being absorbed and reduced. The new power produced became more and more intense. When the last wisp of the divine will of light and the divine will of darkness were completely absorbed, the new power that was formed from the imperishable sword soul was completed. The new power constantly emerged from the sword soul and flowed on the imperishable sword soul. It constantly refined the imperishable sword soul and fundamentally changed the imperishable sword soul. After a period of time, the new power returned to the sword soul and perfectly combined with the sword intent. It became a new sword intent that was similar to the imperishable sword intent, but also superior to it. After the sword intent's mutation was completed, the divine will of light and the divine will of darkness were completely absorbed and disappeared. Chumu woke up. The power of his divine will spread out and enveloped the transformed sword soul, feeling the new power. It has the taste of the imperishable sword intent, but it's also superior to the imperishable sword intent. Chumu muttered to himself. This power is purer, more magnificent, more profound, and more ancient than the imperishable sword intent. This new power is based on the imperishable sword intent. It's a new power that combines the divine will of light and the divine will of darkness. The light will be immortal, the darkness will be eternal, and the sword intent will be indestructible. As such, this power will be called the eternal power. The new sword intent will be the eternal sword intent. The name was set. This was a new power. It was an extension of the imperishable sword intent, but it was also superior to the imperishable sword intent. It had the characteristics of the imperishable sword intent, and it was far more magnificent and profound than the imperishable sword intent. Eternity. The power of his divine will seeped into the eternal sword soul bit by bit, coming into contact with the eternal sword intent. As it seeped into the eternal sword intent, he could directly feel and analyze its characteristics and power. This was a new power. It was a power that Chu Mu had come into contact with for the first time. Because it was based on the imperishable sword intent, it gave him a strange yet familiar feeling. This new power had to be mastered as soon as possible in order to unleash its power. Eternity. Regardless of the passage of time, the changes in space, the withering of plants, the reincarnation of all living things, only I am immortal, only I am eternal. A kind of enlightenment appeared in Chu Mu's heart. He suddenly felt that the eternal sword intent was the true power that belonged to a top divine rank sword intent. The imperishable sword intent was merely the power of a top heaven rank sword intent. The nirvana sword intent just now must have caused a huge commotion. It should have attracted a lot of shark tribe members. I'll use you guys to temper my new sword intent. Thinking to himself, Huang Xiaolong's stellar robe appeared on his body with a thought. He put away the spiritual pool and waved his hand, sending the dark sword steel into his portable space. The moment the dark sword steel disappeared, the surrounding darkness disappeared as well. The water avoidance pearl's protective barrier appeared beside Chu Mu, with several cracks on it. With a swift movement, Huang Xiaolong soared upwards, like a sword splitting the sea. 1,000 meters. 900 meters. 800 meters. The higher Huang Xiaolong went, the less pressure he had to endure, and the faster his speed became. 700 meters. 600 meters, who is it? A sharp light burst out from the tiger shark Lei Bao's eyes, looking incomparably ferocious. In the sea tribe's eyesight was greatly enhanced, allowing them to see further and more clearly. Although Chu Mu was not a sea tribe member, he had practiced the vision sword art, and it had surpassed perfection stage. Therefore, in this deep sea, his eyesight was not inferior to the tiger shark Lei Bao's. When the tiger shark Lei Bao discovered Chu Mu had also discovered him. Sensing his aura, Chu Mu knew that this was a shark tribe Saint Realm expert. Moreover, it was an early one-star Saint Realm expert. Just nice, I'll use you to test my sword. Chu Mu thought to himself, unconsciously feeling a little excited. Previously, Chu Mu was already able to fight an ordinary one-star shark tribe Saint Realm expert. Now that he had entered the forbidden area of the True God Sword sect, comprehended more than 10,000 sword steels, experienced the Void Staircase, and obtained the Sword God Supreme Throne's inheritance, the power of his swordsmanship had increased a lot, and his strength had become even more powerful. At that time, he was confident that he could defeat that one-star shark tribe Saint Realm expert. Now, his cultivation base had successfully broken through to the 8th sky of Nirvana realm, and his strength had increased a lot. He already had the confidence to kill that one-star shark tribe Saint Realm expert. The imperishable sword intent had evolved into the eternal sword intent. Although it was not clear how powerful the new eternal sword intent was, he was certain that it was much more powerful than the imperishable sword intent. With all these factors combined, Chu Mu had great confidence that he could kill a one-star Saint Realm expert. He could feel that the shark tribe Saint Realm expert not far away, although he was only at the early one-star Saint Realm, his strength might not be weaker than the one who had fought with him in the Broken Cloud Mountain. This person should be considered a genius in the shark tribe. Killing a genius from the shark tribe gave him a greater sense of achievement than killing an ordinary shark tribe expert. A dazzling light suddenly appeared, followed by a melodious sword cry. The blazing sword light cut open the water of the deep sea, dispelling the darkness of the deep sea. Even the coldness of the deep sea was dispelled and shattered. A sword thrust out. The new eternal sword intent was poured into it, leading all the power in his body to a high degree of control, twisting into one. Bright colors flowed on the sky beheading sword, endlessly sharp. The power of the 8th grade sword power was fully displayed. Vaguely, there seemed to be a ripping sound. The deep sea was torn apart like a piece of cloth, and nothing could stop it. At the bottom of the sea, thousands of meters deep, because of the enormous pressure, the distance of dozens of meters was even greater than the distance of thousands of meters outside the sea. In an instant, the bright sword light crossed dozens of meters of the deep sea and appeared in front of Tiger Shark Lei Bao. Tiger Shark Lei Bao's eyes stung as if they were pricked by needles. He was very shocked. He couldn't imagine that a human who had just passed through the 8th Nirvana realm could have such a fast sword speed. Moreover, the power was highly concentrated on the sword, which made his hair stand on end. He felt a great threat. Too fast, too strong, too sudden and unexpected. Although Tiger Shark Lei Bao knew that the opponent was a peerless genius or even a monstrous genius of the human race, he was a genius of the Shark clan. There was an essential difference between him and a Nirvana realm expert. He felt that no matter how strong that human was, it was impossible for him to fight against a Saint realm expert like him. He was wrong. The sword light was too fast and too powerful. It was beyond his speed of thinking and reaction. It was impossible to dodge or resist. With a ripping sound, the sword light pierced through Tiger Shark Lei Bao's forehead and came out from the back of his head. The terrifying sword intent crushed Tiger Shark Lei Bao's soul. One sword strike killed a Saint Realm expert. Too weak. I still can't test the power of the eternal sword intent. The sky beheading sword was quickly retracted, and Tiger Shark Lei Bao's interspatial ring was also taken by Chu Mu. Chu thought to himself as he flew past Tiger Shark Lay Bao and continued to climb up. The reason why he could kill Tiger Shark Lay Bao in one strike was related to Tiger Shark Lay Bao's underestimation of him. But more importantly, it was because of his own strength. Otherwise, if he wasn't strong enough, even if Tiger Shark Lay Bao just stood there and let him hack, it would be hard to shake him. Chapter 1420. A ship-shaped flying ship was filled with people, flying rapidly toward the inland. The 5-star sword saint, Merlin, was among the crowd. As a 5-star sword saint, he was very famous in this sea region. However, no one recognized him now because he had used breath training spell to change his appearance, body shape, and aura. Even his cultivation had been lowered by a level. As long as he did not make a move, no one would recognize him. From the beginning of their departure until now, this flying ship had been searched 3 times, all by the Shark Tribe army. Unfortunately, they did not know that Merlin had used breath training spell to change his appearance, so all 3 searches were fruitless. The sea region was too vast. Only the 4 high-level martial saints had directly sensed the changed aura of Chu and the others. After that, in order to pursue Chu, they had wasted a lot of time, causing Merlin and the others to scatter, making it even more difficult to find them. It was also because of this that Merlin and the others had a chance to escape. It was not that they had not reached the inland and were not safe enough. Moreover, Chumu's tracks had been discovered. A large number of Shark Tribe members had already headed toward that sea region, increasing Merlin and the others' chances of escape. After more than a month, they still had not found those few humans. To the Shark Tribe, this was a huge blow. The connection with Master is still there. Master should be fine. Merlin, who was in a cabin of the flying ship, said secretly. It was not that he was very loyal but because he was enslaved by Chu. If Chu died, the mind seed left in his mind would explode, and his mind would be severely damaged or even shattered. That would be the end of serious injury or even death. For his own little life, naturally, he hoped that Chu was still alive. Thousands of meters under the sea, in a narrow trench, it was dark and astonishingly cold. The shark warriors were unable to enter the trench because they were only high-level sharks. They had yet to reach the saint level. Their strength was insufficient to resist the coldness and pressure of the trench. A large group of shark warriors appeared on both sides of the narrow oceanic trench, surrounding it. They had confirmed that the human was inside this oceanic trench. As for how the human entered the oceanic trench, they were also curious. Pairs of eyes flickered with radiance as they stared at the narrow trench. Once a human appeared, they would immediately take action and unleash a devastating attack. In the sea tribe's sea arts would become several times more powerful, becoming even more terrifying. Time passed little by little. All of a sudden, a beam of dazzling light appeared under the narrow trench. It was like a beam of cold starlight in the darkness, making a large number of shark warriors shiver. A kind of fear rose from the depths of their souls. "Attack!" The leader of the shark warriors roared. His voice spread rapidly in the water, and was heard by the other shark warriors. Suddenly, each and every one of the shark warriors attacked. Dreadful sea techniques bombarded that bright light. They could feel that cold beam of light that appeared suddenly had a terrifying sharpness that could pierce through everything. It was the sword light of the human clan. As long as it was a human, they didn't need to care about who he was. They would just attack and kill him directly. Countless terrifying sea arts bombarded that cold beam of light. The sea arts were like dragons, overturning rivers and seas, causing the water flow in the depths of the blue sea to surge. Thousands of meters of water flow surged. In addition to the pressure and coldness, the power of the sea arts became extremely terrifying. Even the Nirvana Realm warriors couldn't withstand it. However, this sea art was directed by the shark warriors. The pressure of the sea arts was directed downwards, so it didn't pose any threat to them. On the contrary, The owner of that cold beam of light would most likely be crushed under the pressure of the turbulent current. After Chu Mu killed the tiger shark Lei Bao, he rushed up at an extremely fast speed. That sword light split the pressure of the deep sea, and a cold beam of light shot out. The moment he was about to rush out of the trench, countless sea arts appeared above him. Sea dragons and giant sharks bared their fangs and brandished their claws, wanting to destroy Chu Mu. The turbulent current brought by the sea arts descended with a terrifying might. Break! Under the control of the eternal sword will, he stabbed out with his sword. The tip of the sword stabbed out heavily, and the power condensed into a point of starlight. The seawater that was attacking him instantly stopped, and then collapsed and dissipated. The terrifying turbulent current of the deep sea was even more powerful than the sea arts. However, under Chu Mu's sword, it was still shattered and dispersed. This scene shocked the Shark Clan warriors. Before they could recover from their shock, a cold light rapidly enlarged in front of their eyes, piercing into their eyes. It made them feel as if their eyes were pierced by the tip of a sword. It was incomparably painful, and they quickly closed their eyes with a scream. Once they closed their eyes, they could no longer open them again. That was because that cold sword light had rapidly swept past their neck. A terrifying sword intent invaded their bodies, causing severe damage. It remained in their bodies as if it had existed since ancient times. A sword that carried boundless might was able to instantly kill an ordinary one-star saint. How could these high-level shark warriors resist? They didn't even have time to react before they were directly killed. Their corpses sank. Having lost the resistance of their cultivation base, their tyrannical bodies couldn't withstand the pressure of the deep sea. They shattered under the pressure of the deep sea, turning into minced meat. The shark warriors in the distance also discovered Chu Mu. They all charged over, swearing to destroy Chu Mu. Looking from afar, Chu Mu looked like he was being wrapped up in a dumpling. Layer after layer of densely packed shark warriors were surrounding him. The sword light flashed and the imperishable sword appeared in his left hand. The two swords collided. Under the sword force, a silver sound wave spread out. It was incomparably crisp and sharp. Like a ripple of sword light, it rapidly spread out, passing through the sea. Wherever the sword sound passed, the shark warriors trembled. Their faces revealed pained expressions. They only felt that the sharp sound was like an invisible sword that pierced into their minds, bringing them great pain. Chu Mu's goal was not to kill the shark warriors, but to escape. Otherwise, if he continued to stay, it would only become more and more dangerous. Now that his strength had increased substantially, he wanted to rely on his own strength to fight his way out of the encirclement and successfully escape. If he could do so, it would be an extremely good experience for his path of cultivation. It would temper his essence, energy, and spirit, and it would be of great help to his future breakthroughs. Even if he was surrounded by the Sea Tribe's Saint Realm Masters in the end, Chu Mu wasn't afraid because he had something to rely on. Even if an Emperor Realm Master made a move, he could still summon Whitey to help him. However, an Emperor Realm Master probably wouldn't make things difficult for a mere Nirvana Realm cultivator like him. Otherwise, it would be too degrading. Huang Xiaolong spun in the air, his two swords danced in the air. His grade 8 sword force was fully displayed. The eternal force fully displayed the power of his top high god rank sword intent. In an instant, a ring of sword light spread out. The edges of the sword light were incomparably sharp, like the edge of a sword. It cut through the seawater, creating a vacuum. The ring-shaped sword light sliced through countless shark warriors, spreading out to a radius of several thousand meters. In the blink of an eye, there seemed to be a poochie-poochie sound as every shark warrior was cut in half by the ring-shaped sword light. Their corpses fell to the ground, exploding under the pressure of the seawater, turning into countless pieces of flesh and blood, dyeing a large part of the sea red. In one strike, more than 10,000 high-level shark warriors were killed. Chu Mu's terrifying strength was witnessed by the shark warriors in the distance. Each and every one of them was horrified, unable to move. A mere 8th heavens nirvana realm human could actually kill more than 10,000 high-level shark warriors in one strike. Inconceivable, too inconceivable. That kind of battle prowess only belonged to a Saint Realm Master. A Nirvana Realm Master with the strength of a Saint Realm Master, what a terrifying talent. As these thoughts slowly spun in his nearly frozen brain, Chu Mu's 2 swords vibrated. The sharp sword light split the sea water above, increasing its speed as it surged upward without any pressure. Because of Chu Mu's action, the current in the sea became turbulent once again, forming a terrifying turbulence. Between the turbulence, it was as if a waterspout was formed, sweeping up countless pieces of flesh and blood, spreading out in all directions. Along the way, he killed gods and devils that blocked his path. Any shark warrior that attacked Chu Mu would all die under his 2 swords. The Saint Realm experts of the shark race, who were deep in the trench, didn't know what was happening above. They were still searching for Chu Mu's traces in the trench. However, the sea race had their own means of communication. Shark warriors immediately sent messages to those Saint Realm experts. However, the pressure in the trench was extremely great, so the communication was disrupted. The further down they went, the slower the speed. When Chu Mu was close to the sea surface, the Saint Realm experts of the shark race received the news. They were all dumbfounded. They were searching for the other party in the trench, but the other party had already rushed out of the trench and killed more than 10,000 high-level shark warriors. Was this possible? Their first reaction after hearing the news was that they couldn't believe it. They felt that they were being fooled. How could a human practitioner at the 8th sky of Nirvana realm possess such strength? How could he kill more than 10,000 senior shark warriors in one strike? Even if those senior shark warriors didn't resist, it would still take some time. However, the warriors who sent the message couldn't have lied about this. In other words, the human cultivator who was only at the 8th heavenly layer had incomparably terrifying strength. He could even be comparable to a Saint Realm expert. It was also possible that he had some kind of secret treasure. The latter was more likely. They couldn't believe that an 8th heavenly layer human cultivator could be comparable to a Saint Realm expert. It should be known that the number 1 genius of the younger generation of the shark race, Emperor Shark Jade, was only able to contend against an ordinary 1-star Saint Realm expert. He was already considered a monstrous genius of the sea race. Could a human be more powerful than a monstrous genius of the shark race? Regardless of whether they believed it or not, the Saint Realm experts of the shark race all burst out with their fastest speed and rushed upward. Based on the current situation, it was impossible to stop the other party with just the high-level shark warriors. On the contrary, there would be unnecessary casualties. Chapter 1421. Inland, the Kanglan Imperial City was towering and majestic, with a vast territory. It was the largest and most prosperous city in the entire dynasty. In order to highlight the importance of the Myriad Sect Grand Meeting, and also to show the importance of the Kanglan Imperial family to the Myriad Sect Grand Meeting, the location of this Myriad Sect Grand Meeting was within the Kanglan Imperial City, and it was specially approved by the Imperial family. The Myriad Sect Meeting, as the name implied, was the participation of tens of thousands of forces. The Kanglan Imperial City was vast and there were many sections. However, there weren't tens of thousands of sections. The name Myriad Sect had a meaning. Any force that belonged to the Kanglan Imperial City was qualified to participate, such as some sects and clans. Whether they could enter the Myriad Sect meeting or not was another matter. After all, they couldn't pass themselves off as genuine. In the entire Kanglan Imperial City, there were tens of thousands of forces including sects, clans, and other organizations. In the end, there were about 10,000 forces that passed the Imperial family's assessment and could participate in the Myriad Sect meeting. They were worthy of the name Myriad Sect meeting. Those that were eliminated were naturally helpless, but they didn't dare to cause trouble. One had to know that the imperial family was the strongest in the Kanglan imperial city. It was said that there were saint emperors overseeing the imperial family. That was a peerless expert that surpassed the saint realm. There weren't many of such experts in the entire deep blue world. Unable to participate, they could only be reduced to spectators. Tens of thousands of forces passed the assessment and obtained the qualification to participate in the myriad sect meeting. All of them stayed in the Jade Courtyard. The huge Jade Courtyard accommodated tens of thousands of sect disciples. It was obviously more than enough. One couldn't help but admire the terrifying foundation of the Kanglan imperial family. Of course, the residences in the Jade Courtyard were differentiated according to the strength of the participating forces. The stronger the force, the better the residences. The True Sword sect had also passed the assessment and participated in the Myriad sect meeting. However, the True Sword sect wasn't strong among all the sects in the Kanglan imperial city. It belonged to the lower level. However, if the clans were included, the True Sword sect was considered to be in the upper level. Overall, the True Sword sect belonged to the middle level among the tens of thousands of forces that participated in the Myriad sect meeting. The True By Garden was the residence of the True Sword sect in the Jade Courtyard. This time, the True Sword sect was led by Elder Yun Feng and accompanied by guest Elder Yang Jun. They had also selected 10 of the most outstanding inner disciples, 10 of the most outstanding elite disciples, and 10 of the most outstanding core disciples. Although Elder Yun Feng's cultivation base was only at the peak of the 7th sky of Nirvana stage, he was good at handling affairs. It was appropriate for him to lead the team. Yang Jin's cultivation base was at the 1st sky of Nirvana stage, so he was the guard. The other 30 disciples were there to participate in the meeting. Those who couldn't participate naturally had to stay in the sect and wait for their return. Is the sect master in some kind of trouble? He hasn't returned yet, Yun Feng thought to himself. A sect like the True Sword sect that was not strong enough should be led by the sect master. Moreover, Chu Mu had previously said that he would personally lead the team to participate in the Myriad sect gathering, but now it had already been nearly a month since they arrived at the Azure Wave Imperial City, and there was still no news from Chu Mu. Yet, without Chu Mu, they seemed to have lost a pillar of support. Yun Feng didn't know that at this moment, Chu Mu was slaughtering in an ocean region above the blue ocean. The sword light parted the sea and a figure charged out of the sea like a resplendent stream of light, heading straight for the sky. 2 breaths later, figures broke out of the sea one after another, each holding a steel fork or a spear. All of them charged towards the first figure that had charged out. Chasing relentlessly is just courting death. Muttering to himself, Chu Mu didn't even turn his head. He simply waved his right hand backwards and slashed out from an inconceivable angle. With a sharp shio sound, an incomparably sharp sword light, as if cutting apart a wisp of dawn, appeared. It was extremely resplendent and unparalleled. That ray of sword light was like the first ray of dawn, like a line between the sky and the water. It stretched over 100 meters. The sound was soft, but it was extremely sharp. Ever since he had comprehended the forest of 1,000 swords, climbed the 99 void stairs, and received the inheritance of the sword god, his application of the sword had increased by another level. There was a faint possibility that his swordsmanship could reach the middle stage of sword intent. The middle stage of sword intent was stronger than the early stage. The 100-meter-long fine sword light, carrying indescribable sharpness, seemed to cut through the void as it attacked the shark warriors that were chasing him. Silently, dozens of high-level shark warriors that were chasing him had their bodies cut through. Even the weapons in their hands were cut off by the sword light. The cut was incomparably smooth and reflected a luster. Plop, plop, water splashed. One after another, the severed corpses fell down one after another. After killing dozens of high-level shark warriors with one sword, Chu Mu's figure continued to rush upwards. He had reached an extreme in the use of borrowing force. With the help of the sword that he had slashed out, the speed of his ascent had increased by a little. In the sky, there were many saint-level and nirvana realm experts standing in the void. Most of them were humans. When they saw Chu Mu's sword, the saint-level experts were shocked, while the nirvana realm cultivators felt chills all over their bodies. It was so easy to kill dozens of high-level shark warriors with one sword. The power of that sword was so terrifying that they could not resist it. Originally, these people wanted to capture Chu Mu and take a share of the loot or hand him over to the Shark Clan in exchange for some benefits. Chu Mu's sword had dispelled the greed in their hearts. However, the greed in the hearts of those saint-level experts had not been dispelled. He must have obtained the inheritance from the forbidden area of the True God Sword sect. These saint-level experts thought so. The True God Sword sect was once the most powerful sect in the way of the sword. Its inheritance made countless people jealous. Even those who did not specialize in the way of the sword desired to obtain it, because once they obtained the inheritance of the True God Sword sect, they would be able to specialize in the way of the sword. With clear guidance, they would definitely be able to become an extremely terrifying sword cultivator. A true sword cultivator would not be any weaker than a technique cultivator. In fact, they might even be stronger. Unfortunately, there were too few true sword cultivators. It would be good to have 1 out of 10,000 sword cultivators. The blue sea was vast and there were many islands. There were also many humans living on the island. It was not much worse than the inland. Among them, some specialized in technique cultivators, some cultivated both technique cultivators and sword Dao, and some specialized in sword Dao. Among them, those who specialized in technique cultivators were generally the strongest. Next were those who cultivated both technique cultivators and sword Dao. Those who specialized in sword Dao belonged to the weaker group. The sword Dao and sword Dao of the Deep Blue World were relatively weak. Only by cultivating sword energy could one resist technique cultivators. However, there were too few sword cultivators who could cultivate sword energy. Overall, they were unable to resist the other two. It was also because of this that sword maniac Ling Fengshao, Merlin, and other sword saints were so famous. The inheritance of the True God Sword sect was an inheritance that could allow one to become a true sword cultivator. It was an inheritance that many sword cultivators yearned for and even went crazy for. How could they not want to obtain it? With a whoosh, Chu Mu left the sea and flew hundreds of thousands of meters up in the sky. He turned around and was about to turn into a sword light and leave when a person appeared in front of him. Stop! That person was a sword cultivator, a 1-star saint. However, he did not cultivate sword energy, so he was not considered a sword cultivator. Such a saint could be considered the weakest among the saints. This person waved the sword in his hand and attacked Chu Mu. He did not know that before this, Chu Mu had killed the tiger shark Lei Bao of the Shark Clan. Lei Bao was in existence stronger than him. Otherwise, he would not have stood out. A mere 1-star saint dared to wave his sword at him. Chu Mu's lips curled into a cold smile. His speed suddenly increased and he easily dodged the other party's sword. In an instant, he closed in on the other party and waved his 2 swords in a cross. The cross-shaped resplendent sword light contained an immeasurable power as it attacked the 1-star saint. Chu Mu's figure also flew past him at lightning speed. This person did not make a move to intercept, which surprised the others. In the next scene, everyone widened their eyes and felt a chill run down their spine. The 1-star saint was hit by the cross-shaped sword light and his body was torn apart. His interspatial ring automatically flew up and landed in Chu Mu's hand. 1 strike. Just 1 strike was enough to kill a saint-level expert. Even if it was just an ordinary 1-star saint-level expert, it was still a genuine saint-level expert. Even a 2-star saint expert would not be able to kill a 1-star saint expert so easily. Could it be that this guy, who was only at the 8th sky of Nirvana realm, was comparable to a 2-star saint expert? How was this possible? One had to know that the Nirvana realm and the eternal realm were two different levels of life. If the Nirvana realm was considered immortal, then the eternal realm was beyond the mortal realm. It was a huge difference between the two realms. It was not unheard of for a Nirvana realm cultivator to be comparable to an eternal realm expert since ancient times. However, at least the ninth sky of Nirvana realm was comparable to a first sky of eternity realm expert. At most, they would have the upper hand and pay a heavy price to defeat a first sky of eternity realm expert. But now, an eighth sky of Nirvana realm sword cultivator was able to kill a first sky of eternity realm expert with one strike. This was the first time in history. It must be because he obtained the inheritance of the true God Sword sect. The death of the one-star saint expert sent chills down the spines of these saints. An eighth sky of Nirvana realm expert killed a first sky of eternity realm expert. If this person broke through to the eternal realm, wouldn't he be able to kill a third sky of eternity realm expert? Just thinking about it made him feel terrified. A chill surged from the depths of his heart. Soon after, an even greater sense of greed emerged. If they also obtained the inheritance, their strength would increase greatly. At that time, it would be possible for them to challenge those who were one-star or even two-star saints. Thinking of this, the fire of greed burned fiercely. Every saint rank expert's eyes let out a burning light of greed as they all charged towards Chu Mu. Chapter 1422. The azure sky was cloudless for thousands of miles. A brilliant sword light instantly cut across the sky, leaving a trail of sword light that did not dissipate for a long time. Immediately after, streaks of light chased from behind. There were also streaks of light below that broke through the seawater and rushed into the sky, chasing after him. The sword light at the front was Chu Mu. After he killed the one-star martial saint expert with a single strike with his two swords, he performed the flying heaven sword driving technique, increasing his speed by several times. Chu Mu had already cultivated the flying heaven sword driving technique to the Deshang level. In addition, he had gone through 2 nirvanas, which greatly increased the strength of his soul. The power of his consciousness had also increased by several times, causing the strength of Chu Mu's soul to surpass that of an ordinary one-star martial saint. It was even comparable to that of a 2-star martial saint expert. Because of this, he could perform the flying heaven sword driving technique with just a thought. Currently, the flying heaven sword driving technique allowed him to control several swords at the same time. It did not increase his strength much, so this ability was dispensable. However, it was of great help in increasing his speed. Once Chu Mu, who was at the 7th sky of Nirvana realm, exploded with speed, he was faster than an ordinary 1-star martial saint. He was between 1-star martial saint and 2-star martial saint. After breaking through to the 8th sky of Nirvana realm, his speed had increased further, and was comparable to an ordinary 2-star martial saint. When he performed the flying heaven sword driving technique, his speed had increased by several times, and was comparable to an ordinary 3-star martial saint. With such speed, he left the experts below 3-star martial saint behind him in an instant. Moreover, the distance between them was constantly widening. Only those 3-star martial saints and above could keep up with Chu Mu, or even catch up to him. However, there were not many intermediate martial saints who had arrived, and there was not even a single advanced martial saint. It sounded like there were many saint-level experts, but when compared to the total number of cultivators, it was actually a very small proportion. Among the many saint-level experts, there were the most low-level saint-level experts, followed by the middle-level saint-level experts, and there were the least high-level saint-level experts. Those who had reached the 9-star saint level were even rarer. As one of the overlords of the Sea Clan, the number of Shark Clan warriors was in the tens of millions. Among them, the number of saint-grade experts was only in the thousands. It could be said that they were 1 in 10,000. Among the thousands of saint-grade experts there were even fewer high-level saint-grade experts, only a few dozen. On Broken Cloud Mountain, 2 9-star saints and several high-level saints had died. There were more than a dozen of them, which accounted for a large proportion of the total number of death. It was no wonder that the Shark clan would be so furious. Stop him, he has the inheritance of the true God Sword sect. The human race sacred rank experts who could not catch up to Chu Mu all roared. Hearing this, some of the martial saints in front were moved. They all moved to intercept Chu Mu. A sword light shuttled through the air nimbly, moving up and down, left and right, avoiding the interceptions. So cunning! Stop him. Don't let him get away. More and more people joined the ranks to intercept Chu Mu. The pressure on Chu Mu suddenly increased. He could ignore the Nirvana Realm interceptors as if they were ants, but he could not ignore the Martial Saint. Even a 1-star Martial Saint had the ability to threaten him. Although Chu Mu could kill a 1-star Martial Saint, he was still in the Nirvana Realm. Break! With a low shout, the sound was like a sword. The 2 swords collided and pierced forward, tearing left and right. The intercepting light was broken and unimpeded. He flew forward quickly and broke away from the encirclement. But the encirclement was not over. The pursuit had only just begun. I must get the inheritance of Nirvana Realm. Apart from the inheritance of Nirvana Realm, he must have other treasures on him. Greed had taken over these people's hearts, causing them to wholeheartedly want to catch up to Chu Mu and capture him. The Shark clan martial saints also caught up. Their speed in the air was slower than the martial saints of the same level. Therefore, the lower-level Shark clan martial saints could not catch up with Chu Mu. However, some of the middle-level Shark clan martial saints were closing in. Faster, faster, I have to be faster! Chu Mu roared in his heart. His blood was boiling, as if it was going to burn. It was boiling hot, like a flood of magma surging in his body. It made his body seem like it was going to burn. As his strength surged, his potential was being developed bit by bit. His speed also increased a little, becoming faster little by little. His speed is still increasing. The martial saints who were chasing behind were all shocked. No, we can't let him escape. Even if we can't get the inheritance of Nirvana Realm, we must kill him. Otherwise, once he escapes and grows up, he may come back for revenge. I may not be his opponent. Some of the more sinister martial saints secretly thought. In front, another group of martial saints appeared, one after another. There were Nirvana Realm and Eternal Realm experts. The heaven-beheading sword and the imperishable sword were firmly held in his hands. His eyes were cold and sharp. A sharp light shot out like a sword, and his killing intent was awe-inspiring. The 2 swords continued to stab forward. Sword after sword, sword after sword, sword after sword pierced through the sky. Under the control of the eternal sword intent, the power condensed into a single line. Each line was extremely shocking and terrifying. Beam after beam of sword light pierced through the void like an aurora. The speed was extremely fast. The Nirvana Realm cultivators could not dodge at all. They were pierced one by one, and bloody holes appeared on their bodies. The eternal sword will condensed in the wounds and did not disperse. The wounds could not heal at all. Instead, they were constantly torn apart by other forces. Wherever the sword light passed, the eternal sword will remained. What a terrifying sword will! I have never seen such a sword will in my life. Kill, kill, kill. Anyone who tried to stop him was killed. The 2 swords stabbed out continuously. Each sword was extremely sharp. Each sword pierced through one Nirvana Realm cultivator after another. Even 1-star saints could not resist. Even 2-star saints had to be careful because the power of the sword light made them feel as if they were facing an attack from a martial saint of the same level. The sword light was like a silver waterfall. The momentum was light, but the power was very shocking. This meant that Chu Mu's sword art had reached a deeper level after experiencing it again and again. The application of power was more profound and more concentrated, reaching a new height. Even a high-level saint-level expert would be moved if they saw this kind of application of power. The two swords were like the scythe of the Grim Reaper, constantly reaping the lives of the martial saints in front of him. One by one, they were beheaded. The corpses fell into the sea like dumplings. Because of the pursuit, Chu Mu did not dare to stop at all. Naturally, he would not collect the interspatial rings of those who were killed because of a little greed. Although there would be some wealth, it would delay his footsteps to a certain extent. At this moment, he could not be affected at all. Otherwise, he would be surrounded and all his previous efforts would be wasted. The pursuit and interception of the martial saints came wave after wave. It was as if there was no end to it. It brought him incomparable pressure. This pressure was enough to make him collapse. However, Chu Mu was not an ordinary person. Under this pressure, he resisted it. He used the pressure to refine his spirit, develop his potential, and increase his strength little by little. The yuan qi of heaven and earth flowed into Chu Mu's body along with the fluctuations. His cultivation at the early stage of the eighth sky of Nirvana realm also increased unknowingly. Of course, this kind of increase was far from comparable to the increase in cultivation in the spiritual pool, but it was more stable. Fight, fight, fight to the fullest. Kill, 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 kill to your heart's content. His spirit, energy, and spirit were being refined. It kept rising until it reached the limit. Everything around him was clearly reflected in his mind. Immediately, the sword realm was released. It directly covered an area of 2 kilometers. It kept moving along with Chu Mu's rapid advance. Within the sword realm, Chu Mu's strength and speed increased rapidly. Originally, his speed was only comparable to an ordinary 3-star martial saint. Under the amplification of the sword realm, his speed exceeded that of an ordinary 3-star martial saint. It was between the 3-star martial saint and the 4-star martial saint. As for those who were covered by Chu Mu's sword domain, as long as they were Nirvana realm, they instantly lost all their strength and fell downwards. The 1-star saint rank expert's body trembled and immediately stabilized. However, he felt that his strength and speed had clearly decreased. The 2-star saint rank experts were also affected. Although it wasn't much, they still felt that their strength and speed had decreased. Under this situation, Chu Mu's strength became even stronger. The sword light kept piercing out. It was like an aurora piercing through the sky. It was eternal and endless. As he kept killing strong enemies, the murderous aura on his body became more and more dense. Traces of blood-colored aura surrounded his body. Vaguely, there seemed to be the sound of ghosts crying. It affected the souls of everyone in the sword realm, making it difficult for their minds to attack. In a trance, they were pierced by the sword light and became ghosts under Chu Mu's sword. It added a trace of murderous aura to Chu Mu. The imperishable sword kept absorbing the murderous aura and accumulating it. Crazy killing, forgetting everything in the battle. The goal was right in front of him. He could only move forward. With the 2 swords in his hands, he killed his way out and created a future that belonged to him. Vaguely, there were signs of condensing into aura. An illusory sword shape appeared above Chu Mu. It was as if it would be blown away by the wind, but it would condense again. Every time it was blown away and condensed, it would solidify a little bit more. This was the aura that belonged to the sword. It belonged to the aura of an outstanding sword cultivator. It belonged to the kind of determination and courage that was indomitable, cutting through thorns and thorns, fearless of difficulties and obstacles, and fearless of challenges. Die! A thought flashed in his mind and burst out. The 2 swords spun and attacked from the front and back. The sword light was so dazzling that it directly caused the people in front of him to squint their eyes. They unconsciously closed their eyes. The 2 swords that stabbed out condensed all the power in the sword and pierced through the vacuum. It was as if the red-hot sword had pierced through cheese. The sword was like a meteor. It carried a kind of determination of death, and it was unstoppable. Under the sword light, a 2-star martial saint, just reacted in an instant and dodged the first sword light. However, he was hit by the second sword light. His protective vital shield was instantly pierced and torn apart. Coincidentally, it pierced through between his eyebrows. The sword blade pierced through and came out from the back of his head. It instantly retracted without a trace of blood. The terrifying sword intent crushed his soul. This was the first 2-star martial saint to die under Chu Mu's sword. Chapter 1423. Kill him! Damned human, stop immediately! The human and shark race experts roared as they chased. The scene of Chu Mu killing a 2-star martial saint with one strike had deeply shocked them. Not only could he kill a 1-star martial saint, but he could also kill a 2-star martial saint. Horrifying! It was too horrifying. In fact, Chu Mu was able to kill a 2-star martial saint by accident. There was a huge element of luck involved. Firstly, it was because he had been continuously killing and accumulating murderous aura. His aura had risen to a terrifying level. His entire body's essence, chi, and spirit were highly condensed, surpassing the limit and condensing into a sword of spirit. The sword of spirit was different from the condensation of aura. It could be said to be the upgraded version of the condensation of aura. It was more difficult than the condensation of aura. With the condensation of aura into a sword, Chu Mu's sword was even more imposing. Its power had increased, temporarily surpassing the limit. With the enhancement and suppression of the sword domain, it wasn't impossible for him to kill an ordinary 2-star martial saint. It had to be said that the 2-star Saint Tier Elite's luck wasn't very good either. Hence, he died. Moving forward, continuously moving forward, the 2 swords stabbed again and again. Chu Mu entered a strange state. With every stab, there would be a mysterious comprehension. This comprehension caused him to be engrossed in it, and it also caused him to subconsciously continue to stab with his sword. Stab, stab, stab. The sharpness of the sword tip was displayed to the extreme. Under the control of the eternal sword intent, every sword thrust would leave a sword intent fluctuation in the air that would not dissipate for a long time. Chu Mu quickly flew forward, leaving behind countless sword intent fluctuations. It was shocking. Besieging and intercepting, Chu Mu dodged time and time again, swinging his sword time and time again, shattering all obstacles. Even if there were countless obstacles in front of him, he would break through. Even if the sky was obstructing him, he would pierce through it with the sword in his hand. At this moment, in his mind, a total of 30 sword shadows and 180 sword shadows began to vibrate. Among the 180 sword shadows, a few of them shone brightly and attracted each other, slowly approaching and fusing with each other. The 180 sword shadows became 175 sword shadows. Every thrust of his sword was even more profound. Suddenly, his right hand paused, and the heaven/sword paused as well. An indescribable power condensed and stabbed out. It was silent and did not cause the slightest ripple, making it difficult to detect. The sword light was dazzling, but it was soundless. A 2-star martial saint did not even notice it before his throat was pierced by the silent sword light. Silent sword style. There were over 10,000 sword steels in the forest of 10,000 sword steels, recording over 10,000 sword technique. There were only 30 of the top sword steels. The silent sword style was one of the top sword techniques on the top sword steels. The sword stabbed out silently, and it was impossible to guard against. Before, Chu Mu had comprehended the sword arts from the 30 top-grade sword steels, but he had only comprehended a little bit, and was not proficient enough. But now, as he continued to fight, his momentum was unstoppable, and he continued to kill powerful enemies to sharpen himself. His essence, chi, and soul had surpassed their limits, and his aura had solidified. His 2 swords had pierced out continuously, and he had finally mastered the silent sword style. Once the silent sword style was unleashed, its power was extremely terrifying. Even a 2-star martial saint could not resist it. If the first time he killed a 2-star martial saint was due to luck, then this time it was due to his true strength. The terrifying power of the silent sword style. The imperishable sword also stabbed out silently. Silent sword style. Under the control of the eternal sword will, the power of the silent sword style was extremely terrifying. But the consumption was equally terrifying. With Chu Mu's current cultivation, he could not sustain many strikes. The Shark Clan's middle stage martial saint caught up and attacked. The waves roared, and a giant shark rushed out, blasting towards Chu Mu. A strong sense of danger made Chu Mu change the direction of his sword and stab out. A unique light flashed at the tip of the sword, like a candle flame in the wind. It was that light that seemed to be about to be extinguished that made the power of the stab reach its peak. The power penetrated the tip of the sword. Silent sword style. The space was pierced, leaving a straight vacuum mark. The silent sword style collided with the giant shark. In an instant, the silent sword style was shattered, and Chu Mu was sent flying, spurting blood. The silent sword style was very powerful. It was so powerful that Chu Mu could kill a 2-star martial saint. But this time, the one who attacked was a 4-star martial saint. The tyrannical impact caused Chu Mu to be severely injured. As he spurted blood, he felt as if his internal organs had been shattered. His bones also felt as if they had been shattered. It was extremely painful. His body was full of vitality, quickly emerging from his flesh and blood, healing him. The violent collision also caused Chu Mu to wake up and break away from that mysterious state. With this pause, the surrounding people quickly surrounded him. Their eyes were ferocious, and they grinned maliciously. They could see that Chu Mu was severely injured, and his strength had been greatly reduced. Now that he had stopped, he was no match for them at all. "Get lost!" A tyrannical and ferocious voice sounded. The Shark Clan martial saints chased after him, attacking without any scruples, forcing back the humans surrounding Chu Mu. "Damn Sea Clan!" A human martial saint cursed in a low voice. Immediately, several pairs of ferocious eyes fell on his face, causing him to tremble. "Die!" A Shark Clan martial saint attacked without any scruples. The long spear in his hand danced, and he suddenly thrust it forward. His aura was fierce, and countless blue energy revolved around the spear like a blade. With a boom, the spear carried endless power, like the fury of the sea, and stabbed into the human martial saint. The human martial saint was directly hit, and he was sent flying, spurting blood. The other martial saints were shocked and enraged, but they didn't dare to attack these Shark Clan martial saints. Once they did, the consequences would be terrible. Just looking at the current situation, the Shark Clan army had been on the move for more than a month, continuously searching for and killing. Under the pressure of the Shark Clan martial saints, the human martial saints retreated. Although they were vexed, there was nothing they could do. The previous excitement of chasing Chu Mu and surrounding Chu Mu had disappeared. No matter what, Chu Mu would eventually fall into the hands of the Shark Clan. The Shark Clan martial saints surrounded Chu Mu one after another, completely sealing him off. He couldn't escape even if he wanted to. Soon after, the Shark Clan warriors also surrounded him. They were so dense that not even a drop of water could trickle through. "Lowly human, you shall pay the price for your crimes from now on." The eyes of every Shark Clan martial saint were filled with anger, anger that came from the bottom of their hearts. This anger was enough to burn Chu Mu to ashes. "Lowly human, go to hell!" A Shark Clan martial saint was enraged. With a spin of his spear, it pierced through the vacuum and pierced towards Chu Mu. A terrifying energy was emitted from his body, flowing into the spear through his arm and rapidly converging towards the tip of the spear. Using such a spinning method to exert force could make the energy more condensed and less wasted. The speed of the spear was extremely fast, as though it had ignored the gap in space. It appeared in front of Chu Mu, wanting to pierce through his throat. At this moment Chu Mu reacted. he crossed his swords and blocked the spear thrust by a hair's breadth. A huge force erupted from the tip of the spear. With a loud boom, Chu Mu's arms trembled and he was sent flying, spitting out blood once more. Weak human, go to hell! The two-star Shark Clan martial saint struck out with his spear once more, like a flood dragon emerging from the sea. Chu Mu resisted time and time again, but he was repelled time and time again. Each time, his body would tremble and he would spit out blood. The injuries in his body would worsen, and even his regenerative ability couldn't keep up. If this were to carry on, one would wonder if he would die from spitting out blood. Constantly blocking attacks, constantly retreating, and constantly getting injured. At this moment, Chu Mu was like a caged bird that was surrounded. The other Shark Clan experts all sneered. The more this human was in pain, the happier they were. Killing him in one go would be letting him off too easily. They would not be able to vent their anger and pain from their fellow clansmen being killed. Don't delay. Kill him! A Shark Clan martial saint frowned and shouted. He didn't let himself get carried away. He still remembered the strange phenomenon when Chu Mu underwent nirvana. Such a monstrous existence couldn't be left alive. He had to kill him as soon as possible to prevent any accident. With this shout, the two-star Shark Clan martial saint paused for a moment. The scales on his arms opened up slightly, as though there was an aura gushing out. His muscles swelled, and a tyrannical power was brewing like a tsunami. Die! With a loud shout, the two-star Shark Clan martial saint struck out with all his might. His spear was like a fully drawn bow as it pierced out. Its speed was extremely fast, and its power was frighteningly ferocious. The power constantly revolved and gathered at the tip of the spear. The space below was pierced and shattered. An extreme sense of danger surged into Chu Mu's heart. His face was pale and bloodless. However, his eyes grew brighter and brighter. In the depths of his pupils, there was a glimmer of light that gradually appeared. In his mind, all sorts of mysterious comprehensions were surging. The 205 sword shadows that were related to piercing began to shine brighter and brighter. The Tao of the sword, piercing, hacking, slashing, every single one of them has its own mysteries, its own essence. It is a kind of will, a mysterious will. It is like the will of the gods, like the will of the sword. Perhaps this is the true essence of the sword. It is the foundation of the ancient Tao of the sword. Piercing, advancing courageously, piercing through all obstacles, with incomparably firm faith. The true meaning of the piercing sword. In an instant, Chu Mu's eyes brightened. It was as though two incomparably sharp sword lights had shot out from them, causing the hearts of the surrounding Shark Clan experts to suddenly jump. Their eyes stung as though they had been pierced by the tip of a sword. His incomparably sharp eyes looked at the two-star Shark Clan martial saint that was thrusting his spear over. This time, Chu Mu did not block. Instead, he struck with his sword. The sky-beheading sword and the imperishable sword stabbed out one after the other, as though they had stabbed out at the same time. Silent sword style. There was a line of sword light. Without any sound, the two swords stabbed at the tip of the opponent's spear at almost the same time. The full-force attack of the two-star Shark Clan martial saint was extremely terrifying. However, after Chu Mu had comprehended the true meaning of the piercing sword, the silent sword style that he used was much stronger. Chapter 1424. There was a crisp sound like an eggshell being cracked next to one's ear. The clear cracking sound caused the expressions of every Shark Clan member to change drastically. In front of them was an incomparably powerful spear. Starting from the tip of the spear, it was being bombarded by an invisible but irresistible force. The tip of the spear trembled violently and began to shatter bit by bit, rapidly spinning downwards. The tip of the spear was rapidly covered in cracks, spreading towards the body of the spear. After what seemed like a long time, but only an instant, the entire spear was covered in cracks and shattered. Pieces of fingernail-sized fragments shot out. There seemed to be a layer of invisible force in front of Chu Mu. Not a single fragment shot towards him, the surroundings, or the person holding the spear. In a moment of carelessness, the person holding the spear was struck by a fragment. His tough scales were directly broken and torn apart, causing blood to flow. The pain caused this 2-star Saint-level expert to react. He hurriedly activated his energy, forming a layer of protection on his scales to block the fragments of the spear. A cold light suddenly appeared in front of him. It was like the cold stars in the night sky that he sometimes saw when he rushed out of the sea. It was distant, deep, and cold. That cold star was the tip of Chu Mu's sword. The sword stabbed out silently. The silent sword style carried a terrifying power as it pierced through the void and attacked the 2-star Saint-level expert. Stop! Many Saint-level experts were shocked and angry when they saw this scene. They all roared and attacked Chu Mu. However, Chu Mu didn't care about them at all. His sword pierced forward, aiming for the kill. There was a soft chi-chi sound, but it caused one soul to scatter. The sky-beheading sword pierced through the forehead of the 2-star Saint-level expert and came out from the back of his head. The power that the sword carried gathered at the tip of the sword. The moment it pierced through the other party's forehead, it also pierced through his spirit. The sword was quickly retracted without a trace of blood. The other party's space ring also fell into Chu Mu's hand. Immediately, the 2 swords danced around his body, forming a circular sword light. It blocked the attack, and he borrowed the force of the attack to quickly retreat and dodge. Trapped in a tight encirclement, Chu Mu knew that it would be difficult for him to escape. Since that was the case, then he would fight. He would fight until he reached his limit, and then he would summon the experts within the sword sect's spirit seal to assist him. The 2 swords vibrated and sword light filled the air. His aura skyrocketed, and his essence, chi, and soul condensed into swords that floated in the air. Although his face was pale and his body was injured, at this moment, Chu Mu's aura was at its strongest. A trace of fear actually appeared in the hearts of the Shark Clan experts, and they didn't dare to move forward. Soon after, they reacted and became angry out of shame. They were actually frightened by a lowly human. The human experts on the periphery were all dumbfounded. It was hard to imagine that a mere 8th heavenly layer Nirvana stage cultivator dared to be so arrogant after killing the Shark Clan experts. If it were them, they definitely wouldn't have dared to attack, and would have directly surrendered. Thinking of this, some of the human experts didn't know why, but a trace of shame welled up in their hearts. Soon after, some of them felt angry, and couldn't wait for Chu Mu to die. The Shark Clan experts launched a siege. Chu Mu dodged, blocked, and counterattacked. He was like a war demon, fighting endlessly. There were many powerful Shark Clan experts, and Chu Mu was alone. Although his strength wasn't bad, he was already injured and couldn't resist, but he still held on. Fight, fight, fight. This was a very rare opportunity. In such a cruel life or death battle, his comprehension of the true meaning of sword thrust had deepened. Chu Mu didn't want to let it go. However, as he was sent flying again and again, his injuries became more and more severe. His organs were nearly shattered, and his bones were covered with cracks. Chu Mu knew that his body had reached its limit. If he weren't a body cultivator, his body would have already exploded into pieces. It seems that this tempering can only end here. I can only use one more chance. Chu Mu thought to himself. The path of the sword was like this. Without tempering, one wouldn't be able to accomplish anything. His consciousness gradually blurred, but Chu Mu persisted. With a thought, he summoned a powerhouse from the Sword Sect Spirit Seal. To deal with these Shark Clan Saint-level experts, he only needed to summon the weakest one. As a human, an 8th heavenly layer Nirvana dares to wave his sword at the sea races. As for you Saint-level experts, you actually submit to the despotic might of the sea races. Not only do you watch helplessly as your own people are killed by the sea races, but you even become their accomplices. You are the shame of humanity. Suddenly, a voice sounded out from the distance. This voice was filled with vigor and also contained a trace of gentleness, like the clouds in the sky. Then, a terrifying sword intent arrived. This sword intent was extremely sharp, causing every Shark Clan expert and every human to feel a chill run down their spine, as if they were being cut by an invisible sword. Waves of pain raced through their bodies. Within this extremely sharp sword intent, there was also a kind of cloud-like gentleness. It was endless, filled with tension, and difficult to resist. Every Shark Clan expert was unable to move, let alone kill Chu-Mu. This scene was shocking. Chu-Mu's nearly blurry consciousness instantly became clear. He looked around in surprise. In the distance, a figure appeared. He was walking in the void, wearing a white robe. From afar, he looked like a white cloud floating over. In one glance, the white-robed man was still tens of thousands of meters away. In the next moment, he was already hundreds of meters away. In another moment, he was right in front of him. The person who came was wearing a white robe. He looked like a middle-aged man in his 40s. Of course, his actual age was already several thousand years old. This person's appearance was slightly ordinary, but it contained a kind of carefree elegance that hid the vicissitudes of life. When the human saint-level experts saw this person, their expressions changed drastically. Sky Cloud Sword Saint Mo Bayun, it's actually him. Hasn't he not appeared for hundreds of years? In the Blue Sea region, there were many humans. After countless years, there would naturally be some super experts born. Some super experts had already retired for many years, and this Sky Cloud Sword Saint Mo Bayun was one of them. He had been in seclusion for hundreds of years, and no one knew why he had appeared here. Sky Cloud Sword Saint Mo Bayun, a 7-star sword saint. It was rumored that he had once used the sword in his hand to kill an 8-star saint-level expert, which established his unparalleled reputation. It was rumored that he was not 10 times stronger. He had once used the sword in his hand to kill many Sea Tribe experts. He had also been hunted down by the Sea Tribe, but in the end, he had still managed to survive. Not only did the hunts not kill him, but they had also become his whetstone, making his way of the sword more refined and his strength stronger. It was rumored that when the Oceanic Tribe's super powerhouse made a move to kill Mo Bayun, his mysterious master appeared and instantly killed the Oceanic Tribe's super powerhouse, who had reached the 9-star saint level with a single sword strike. This shocked countless Oceanic Tribes' powerhouses and caused them to give up on pursuing Mo Bayun. The reason why he was able to intimidate countless Sea Tribe experts was that his master was Heaven's Word Holy Master, one of the 5 holy masters of the human clan. He had been famous for thousands of years, and his strength had already surpassed that of a 9-star saint thousands of years ago. In other words, the Sky Sword Saint Master had already existed thousands of years ago. He was ranked 3rd among the 5 Saint Masters of the Blue Sea, along with the other 4 supreme experts of the human race. All of these made Mo Bayun, the Sky Cloud Sword Saint, extremely famous in the Blue Sea. Even after hundreds of years, he was still extremely influential. Mo Bayun, this is not something that you should interfere in, a 4-star saint-level expert of the Shark Clan shouted sternly. 100 years was actually not a long time for a saint-level expert. These saint-level experts of the Shark Clan had also heard of Mo Bayun's ferocious power. They also knew that behind Mo Bayun was one of the 5 saint masters of the human race, the Sky Sword Saint Master, who was ranked 3rd. He was not to be trifled with. Why can't I interfere in hunting down my junior of the human race? Mo Bayun said unhurriedly with his hands behind his back. His gaze seemed calm, but it was extremely sharp, piercing through the void. Mo Bayun withdrew his sword intent. However, no one dared to underestimate him or act rashly. Facing Mo Bayun's question, the Shark Clan expert did not know how to refute. Everything was because of the absolute difference in strength. He would not forget that many years ago, It was this human who did not seem to have any evil aura that killed hundreds of thousands of members of the Sea tribe with only one sword. His hands were stained with the blood of the Sea tribe. In the Blue Sea, not all humans were afraid of the Sea tribe. However, there were too few people who were not afraid of the Sea tribe. Those who were not afraid of the Sea tribe and could survive were even fewer. The Sky Sword Saint Master was one of them. His disciple was also one of them. Mo Bayun, you are indeed very powerful. However, our shark clan is not weak either. This person has killed a large number of our warriors and saint-level experts. He has brought great losses to our shark clan. There is an irreconcilable blood feud between us. The shark clan saint-level expert roared. In that case, I will not kill you today. I will let you live. In the future, this little brother will come and take your lives personally, Mo Bayun said unhurriedly. Mo Bayun, it is not a wise choice to be enemies with our shark clan. The shark clan saint-level expert was extremely furious. However, he did not dare to attack. He could only say so. That kind of sullen feeling almost made him explode. One should know that they had always been overbearing and arrogant when facing the human race. That kind of feeling was completely different from what they were feeling now. I am right here. Let your shark clan army come. Mo Bayun's tone was so indifferent. However, his words made the shark clan experts' faces change drastically. Did they really dare to call the shark clan army? If the great army of the shark clan came, they would definitely be able to take down Mo Bayun. Although a 7-star sword saint was powerful, he was not invincible. The problem was the heavenly sword saint. Once he was provoked, no one in the shark clan would be able to stop him unless the old ancestor of the Emperor Shark acted. Little brother, come with me. Mo Bayun did not pay any more attention to the shark clan and the human race. Instead, he stretched out his hand towards Chu Mu. Chu Mu's body immediately flew over. Suddenly, something strange happened. The 4-star shark clan saint-level expert's face turned ruthless. He activated all of his strength and attacked with his spear the moment Chu Mu passed by him. Chapter 1425. He thrust out his spear. The spear light pierced through the air with murderous intent. At such a close distance and with such a fast and powerful attack, even if Chu Mu was prepared, he could not dodge it. It was too close and too fast, and his injuries were too heavy. Just as he was about to summon the sword sex spirit imprints experts to attack, Mo Bayun's sword and finger were standing side by side. He lightly swiped forward, and a wisp of cloud pervaded the air. It instantly crossed a distance of several thousand meters and gracefully swept past the 4-star shark species saint rank expert's head. The fierce thrust of the spear stopped. The sharp tip of the spear had already pierced through Chu Mu's protective sword aura. If it went any further, it would pierce through Chu Mu's starry robe and pierce through his body. Chu Mu could clearly feel the piercing sharpness and coldness on his back. However, the spear stopped there. The 4-star shark race expert widened his eyes. He wanted to exert his strength and thrust out his spear again. However, he felt his strength quickly drain away. He wanted to do it, but he did not have enough strength. A cut quietly appeared on his neck. Immediately after, blood spurted out like a fountain, sending his head flying, reflecting in every pair of shocked eyes. Dead. With just one finger, no one noticed the fluctuation. A 4-star shark race expert died just like that. It was extremely horrifying. The other shark race experts did not dare to move. Their bodies trembled uncontrollably. They were afraid that Mo Bayun would misunderstand and kill them. Then, they would be wronged. They could only watch Mo Bayun take Chu Mu away. Only when Mo Bayun and Chu Mu disappeared did they let out a sigh of relief. However, they realized that they were drenched in sweat. Mo Bayun is the disciple of the Heavenly Sword Saint. He took away this 8th sky of Nirvana realm. Does he want to take him as his disciple? It's possible. This kid is only at the 8th sky of Nirvana realm, But he can kill 1-star or 2-star saint experts. He can be called a peerless genius. His future is limitless. Once he grows up, he will be another saint master. No, he will be even stronger than a saint master. I think, with his talent, will he be taken as a disciple by the heavenly sword saint. When he said that, everyone fell silent. Being accepted as a disciple by Mo Bayun and being accepted as a disciple by Sky Sword Saint Venerate were two completely different concepts. If he was accepted as a disciple by the Heavenly Sword Saint, he would be able to do whatever he wanted in the Blue Sea. This was a huge matter. Everyone quickly left. The Shark Clan experts had to report this matter to their superiors. They might even have to ask old ancestor Emperor Shark for instructions. Even Mo Bayun had appeared. Who would dare to say that the Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable was not involved? Being carried by Mo Bayun, Chu Mu's consciousness gradually became blurry, but he forced himself to endure it. Under the waves of the eternal sword intent, his consciousness gradually burned and became stronger. The blurry feeling also gradually weakened. While carrying Chu Mu, Mo Bayun didn't say anything. Instead, he kept observing him. Seeing that Chu Mu was still holding on despite his heavy injuries, he couldn't help but nod inwardly. No one spoke. Mo Bayun's speed was extremely fast, many times faster than Chu Mu's full speed. Thanks to his powerful self-healing ability, Chu Mu's injuries quickly healed as time passed. What a shocking self-healing ability! Although Mo Bayun didn't say anything, he had been paying attention to Chu Mu's situation. He could feel that Chu Mu's vitality had turned from weak to vigorous. His heavy injuries had become light injuries, and then they were quickly healed. He couldn't help but be amazed. When he arrived, he didn't see the scene of Chu Mu killing the saint experts. Otherwise, he would be even more shocked. However, he saw that Chu Mu was still fighting despite being surrounded by the saint experts of the Shark Clan. One had to know that Chu Mu was only at the 8th sky of Nirvana realm. Mo Bayun no longer doubted that his master had sent him out to save Chu Mu. Many thanks for Senior's help. After completely recovering, Chu Mu's condition was better. He opened his eyes and said to Mo Bayun, "No need to be so polite." Mo Bayun said indifferently, "But why did Senior save me?" Chu Mu asked. "You'll understand when we get there." Mo Bayun smiled faintly. Chu Mu didn't ask any more questions. He would talk about it when they got there. There were many islands above the Blue Sea, like the stars in the sky. Some of the islands were inhabited by humans. They had developed and appeared to be prosperous. Some of the islands only had some beasts or strange life forms. There were also some islands with thin heaven and earth yuan qi. They were deserted. The islands were also divided into different sizes. The big ones were even comparable to a continent, while the small ones were only the size of a pellet. Under normal circumstances, the density of heaven and earth yuan qi on an island was directly related to the size of the island. However, there were always exceptions. Sky Sword Island was a famous island on the Blue Sea. It was also a pilgrimage place for many sword cultivators on the Blue Sea. The surface area of Sky Sword Island wasn't big. Compared to a big island like Lianyun Island, the difference was huge. Sky Sword Island's surface area was only 1/10 of Lianyun Island's surface area. In terms of reputation, the Sky Sword Island wasn't as famous as Lianyun Island. However, in terms of reputation and influence among experts, Sky Sword Island far surpassed Lianyun Island. This was because the Sky Sword Island was the place where the third of the 5 sacred sages, the Heavenly Sword Sacred Venerable, resided. It was originally a small island, but it became famous because of the Heavenly Sword Sacred Venerable. Even though the Heavenly Sword Sacred Venerable hadn't appeared in the world for many years, no one dared to invade the Sky Sword Island. When experts passed by, they would purposely make a detour. Firstly, it was to show their respect. Secondly, it was to avoid causing a misunderstanding and getting killed. Mo Baiyun brought Chu Mu closer to the Sky Sword Island. Looking from afar, the Sky Sword Island looked like a sword imprinted on a gigantic sapphire. Upon closer inspection, one could see that there was only one mountain peak on the island. It was like a sword pointing straight to the heavens. Chu Mu's sharp senses allowed him to capture traces of sword intent rippling out from the Sky Sword Island. It spread all over the island, and there was nowhere to hide. Even though the sword intent was weak, and those who weren't sharp enough wouldn't be able to detect it, Chu Mu felt a chill run down his spine. He had a feeling that as long as the owner of the sword intent was willing, he could turn the Sky Sword Island into a land of peril. Even if a high-level martial saint expert entered the island, they would be killed by the omnipresent sword intent. Even their divine soul would be shattered. Mo Baiyun brought Chu Mu into the range of the sword intent. The sword intent seemed to recognize people, and it didn't obstruct them at all. Mo Baiyun brought Chu Mu and flew directly to the only mountain. Chu Mu lowered his head and looked down. The environment of the Sky Sword Island wasn't good. There were a lot of rocks and trees. What was interesting was that the trees grew straight. There were very few branches and leaves, but they were full of vitality. Moreover, the vitality contained traces of sharpness. It was as though they weren't trees, but sharp swords. Practicing the sword in a place like this must be very effective, Chu Mu thought to himself. Sometimes, cultivation was also about the environment. It was the so-called geographical advantage. The right time, the right place, and the right people were all essential factors for cultivation. The corresponding factors corresponded to the corresponding cultivation method, and cultivation would be more efficient. They flew towards the Sky Sword Mountain at lightning speed. Soon, they arrived at the Sky Sword Mountain. In a relatively flat area of the Sky Sword Mountain, a thatched cottage stood alone. The thatched cottage seemed to have been there for a long time, and it contained traces of vicissitudes of life. Mo Baiyun brought Chu Mu and landed a dozen meters away from the thatched cottage. His arms hung down naturally, and he had a respectful look on his face. "Master, I've brought him back," Mo Baiyun said respectfully. Chu Mu was startled. He didn't feel any life or a fluctuation from the thatched cottage. Then, his vision blurred, and a figure appeared in front of him. It seemed to have been standing there all along. However, Chu Mu knew that there was no such person before. It was too fast, and there wasn't any aura fluctuation. He just appeared in front of him. If he wanted to kill him, he probably wouldn't have been able to sense it. After being shocked, Chu Mu sized up the person who appeared in front of him. It was a tall old man with silver hair and a long silver beard. This old man was wearing a silver wide robe. When the mountain wind blew, his robe fluttered, and he immediately looked like he was riding the wind. The old man's face was full, and his skin was ruddy. His eyes were bright, and there was a trace of frightening coldness in the depths of his pupils, like the tip of a sword. There was a trace of a smile on this old man's face, and he gave off a kind feeling. However, he suddenly stretched out his hand and pointed at Chu Mu. It was as if his finger had turned into a sword, and he stabbed it out. It was an ordinary stab, but there was an extreme sharpness that made people tremble. It could pierce through everything, and there was nothing that couldn't be broken. There was nothing that couldn't be blocked. Chu Mu's expression changed drastically. That finger was like a sword, and it gave him a feeling that he couldn't block it. It contained a kind of true intent that could pierce through everything. That was the true intent of the sword stab. This was the foundation of the ancient sword Tao. He didn't expect that other than himself, there was a second person who had mastered it. Chu Mu didn't have time to think. He unsheathed the sky-beheading sword and stabbed it out. The true intent of the sword stab was activated, and the sword was incomparably sharp. All the power was gathered at the tip of the sword, and it pierced towards the old man's finger. In an instant, the sky-beheading sword collided with the finger, and there was a sound of metal clashing. It was as if it wasn't a finger that had been stabbed, but a sword. A powerful force burst out, and Chu Mu couldn't stop retreating. The sky-beheading sword trembled, and a terrifying sharpness pierced through the sword towards his palm. Under the power of the art of deflection, the power was deflected, and the eternal sword intent was activated, resisting the invading sharpness. Chu Mu retreated a total of 9 steps, and the sky-beheading sword in his hand trembled. His palm was numb, and there was a tearing pain. The imperishable sword appeared in his left hand, and he crossed the 2 swords in front of him in a defensive posture. His eyes were sharp, and they shone brightly. He looked at the old man in front of him with vigilance. That finger just now had already let Chu Mu know that the old man wasn't someone he could fight against. He was also prepared to summon the experts in the sword sect's spiritual seal. Little friend, don't be nervous. That finger just now was just a test. Seeing that Chu Mu was on high alert, the old man in the silver robe withdrew his finger and put his hands behind his back. He had a smile on his face. This is my master, the Sky Sword Saint, one of the 5 saints of the Blue Ocean human race, Mo Baiyun said, which made Chu Mu lower his guard for a moment. Chapter 1426. The Sky Sword Peak was the only peak on the Sky Sword Island. It stood alone between the heavens and the earth, like a heavenly sword pointing to the sky. The strong sea breeze blew continuously, causing the hair and robes of the 3 people on the Sky Sword Peak to flutter. Chu Mu's expression changed. It was as if his heart was struck by lightning. The Sky Sword Saint Venerable! The Sky Sword Saint Venerable, one of the 5 sacred venerables on the Blue Sea. He was ranked 3rd. When he was inland, he did not know. However, after coming to the Blue Sea, he gradually understood that the Blue Sea was the territory of the sea race. It was very difficult for the human race to live in the Blue Sea. After all, how could they allow others to sleep beside them? Hence, a long time ago, the human race was hunted down by the sea race. It was difficult for them to survive. It was the human race's experts who fought back that they managed to survive. It was only until the appearance of super experts that the human race had the ability to fight against the sea race. The True God Sword sect also gave the human race the foundation to fight against the sea race. However, it was very difficult. After that, the True God Sword sect declined and the human race was in danger. It was only when the sacred venerables appeared that the human race's position became more and more stable. However, the sea race also had experts who were on par with the human race's sacred venerables. The human race's 5 sacred venerables were only a simple guarantee for the human race to survive in the Blue Sea. It was not enough for the human race to become the master of the Blue Sea. This was also why the human race was still being oppressed by the sea race. However, it was only oppressive. There was no hunting like before. It was much better. The 5 sacred venerables were the pillars of the human race in the Blue Sea. They held up the sky for the human race. However, they only allowed the human race to maintain the basic living space in the Blue Sea. Although the oceanic race was arrogant, there was a limit to what they could do. They would not cause a huge conflict between the 2 races. Although the oceanic race would definitely win in the end if the 2 races clashed, the oceanic race would still suffer great losses with 5 saint venerables of the human race present. Chu Mu would never have thought that the person in front of him was the Sky Sword Saint Venerable, one of the human race's 5 sacred venerables. Greetings, Senior Sky Sword. Chu Mu immediately saluted with his sword. I've never seen someone as talented as you in the way of the sword. Heavenly Sword Saint Master nodded and said slowly. As a Heavenly Sword Saint Master who had surpassed the 9-star saint level, he had been immersed in the sword principle for more than 10,000 years. He had sharp eyes. Since ancient times, no one has been more talented than you in the sword principle. Senior, you flatter me, Chu Mu said. You have obtained the inheritance of the True God Sword sect, right? Suddenly, the Heaven's Word Saint Venerable spoke, causing Chu Mu's expression to turn cold. The human race, sacred rank experts that chased after him before were aiming for the inheritance of the true God Sword sect. Now that Heavenly Sword Saint Sovereign also mentioned this, Chumu had to be vigilant. Got it. Chumu calmed himself down and answered calmly. He was prepared to summon the Sword Sect's spiritual seal expert at any time. Excitement flashed across Heaven Sword Saint Master's face. Many years ago, I was still a Nirvana Realm Sword Principle cultivator. The True God Sword Sect still existed. As Heaven Sword Saint Master spoke, his tone became distant. His eyes became deep, as if he was reminiscing. Back then, he was just one of the human cultivators who were oppressed by the Sea Tribe. When he was still a low-level Nirvana Realm cultivator, he was chased by the Sea Tribe. When he was on the verge of death, he was saved by an elder of the True God Sword Sect. The True God Sword Sect had already declined and lost its glory. After the elder of the True God Sword Sect saved Heaven Sword Saint Master, he taught him sword skills and sword principle, which laid the foundation and path for Heaven Sword Saint Master's rise. It could be said that Heaven Sword Saint Master's achievements today were inseparable from the elder of the True God Sword Sect. To Heaven Sword Saint Master, the elder of the True God Sword Sect could be considered as half a teacher. After that, Heaven Sword Saint Master's strength increased and he traveled around. He left the Blue Sea and traveled inland. He challenged everywhere and became more and more powerful. His understanding and mastery of sword principle became more and more profound. Finally, he broke through and became a powerful sword saint. After that, he continued to travel and explore the inland. One day, he had a fortuitous encounter and entered a broken and sealed small world. It was a cave abode left behind by an expert of the way of the sword. In the cave dwelling, he obtained the inheritance of the sword principle expert and cultivated for many years in the small broken world. He digested the inheritance as much as he could, and his strength continued to increase. Finally, he was strong enough to break through the small broken world and return to the deep blue world. In the blink of an eye, many years had passed. He continued to challenge sword saints in the inland to sharpen his sword principle and speed up the integration of the inheritance. When he felt that he did not need to continue challenging, he left inland and returned to the Blue Sea. However, he found that the Blue Sea had undergone a great change. The True God Sword Sect had disappeared and was destroyed. It had become history. No matter what, he had once received a favor from an elder of the True God Sword Sect. He could be considered half a teacher. Naturally, he had to investigate. After investigating, he pointed to the Heavenly Saint cult. However, after investigating further, he found out that the Heavenly Saint cult was not the main culprit. They were only the last participants. Before that, the True God Sword Sect was almost destroyed. The Heavenly Saint cult had just taken advantage of the situation. Otherwise, the Heavenly Saint cult would not be as strong as they were now. Since the Heavenly Saint cult was not the main culprit, Heaven Sword Saint Master only killed a portion of the Heavenly Saint cult's experts. He did not destroy the entire Heavenly Saint cult. He continued to investigate. However, the more he investigated, the more confusing it became. In the end, he lost all clues. Without any clues, Heaven Sword Saint Master did not continue investigating. However, he still remembered the kindness he had received in the past. Now, after hearing that someone had received the inheritance of the True God Sword Sect, Heaven Sword Saint Master was concerned about the younger generation of sword cultivators of the human race. Secondly, he wanted to repay the kindness of the elder of the True God Sword Sect. After hearing what Heaven Sword Saint Master said, Chu Mu was enlightened. Mo Baiyun was also enlightened. So it was because of these reasons that his master wanted him to save Chu Mu from the pursuit of the sea race. If it was back then, I would be interested in the inheritance of the True God Sword Sect. However, my path is already fixed now. The inheritance of the True God Sword Sect is not very useful to me. In the end, Heaven Sword Saint Master said. This was the truth. After cultivating to his level, his path was already fixed. If he wanted to change it, he would have to start from the beginning. Moreover, the inheritance that he had received was also very powerful. It was very suitable for him. Senior, thank you for saving my life, Chumu said. You don't have to do this. If you are willing, you can stay here temporarily, Heaven Sword Saint Master said. Then I will disturb you. Chumu was happy to stay here temporarily because he needed time to sort out his recent gains. This place was undoubtedly a very suitable place. As for the Thousand Sect gathering of the Azure Water Empire, he had temporarily thrown it to the back of his mind and forgotten about it. He had no choice. In the face of such a pursuit, at the critical moment of life and death, he could only think about escaping, drawing his sword, fighting and killing strong enemies. There was no room for anything else. Therefore, Chumu temporarily stayed on the Heaven Sword Peak of the Heaven Sword Island. Heaven Sword Saint Master lived in a thatched hut. Emobayun's hut was somewhere else. Chumu also built his own hut as a temporary shelter. On the Heaven Sword Peak, other than Heaven Sword Saint Master, Emobayun and Chumu, there was a fourth person called Yang Yuchen. He was the second disciple of Heaven Sword Saint Master. Emobayun was the eldest disciple and was at the seventh sky of Aigu realm. Yang Yuchen was the second disciple and was at the fifth sky of Aigu realm. Emobayun looked ordinary, but his aura was like the clouds in the sky. On the other hand, Yang Yuchen was tall and slender. He was handsome and his aura was like a blazing sun. It was very shocking. Yang Yuchen only showed up to meet Chumu once and then went to cultivate. Actually, I have a junior brother, Emobayun said. Emobayun said, however, he is currently training outside. Other than us, no one else knows his identity. Emobayun's second junior brother was naturally the third disciple of Heaven Sword Saint Master. Since no one knew his identity, it was obviously referring to his identity as Heaven Sword Saint Master's disciple. Since that was the case, Chumu did not ask. Somewhere on Heaven Sword Peak, Chumu was practicing his sword. His eyes were extremely sharp as he looked ahead. His gaze was like a sword, as if it could pierce through everything. The power gathered at the tip of the sword and condensed into a point of starlight. He pushed his arm forward and the heaven-slashing sword instantly pierced out. A sharp sound that was almost inaudible was heard. The tip of the sword pierced through the void. The sword was unstoppable. Everything was pierced through by the sword. This wasn't some powerful technique. It was just a very normal basic sword technique's stab word formula. However, because Chumu had comprehended the true meaning of stab, one stab had an irresistible might. Basic sword techniques had been passed down since the beginning of the sword. They had been passed down for a very long time. It was the foundation that every sword cultivator had to cultivate. It was indispensable. But now, very, very few people understood that within the basic sword technique, there were actually endless mysteries. That mysteries were the true intent. Even Chumu did not know this before he received the inheritance of True God Sword Sect. Based on his own cultivation, he did not know how long it would take for him to comprehend and grasp it. After grasping the true meaning, Chumu understood that without grasping the true meaning of sword, one could not be called a sword cultivator. Of course, sword cultivators referred to the true sword cultivators of the ancient times. They were not the sword cultivators that were recognized by the masses today. The true sword cultivators of ancient times had all grasped the sword intent. With the coordination of the sword intent, each of their swords contained an incomparably terrifying power. The lethality was extremely shocking. Chumu had only just grasped the true meaning of sword thrust, and there was still a lot of room for improvement. Therefore, he was diligently training. The true meaning of sword thrust was directly related to the stab word formula of the foundation sword art. The training method was rather primitive. Aside from comprehending, The only thing to do was to use the sword and continuously stab with the sword to deepen one's comprehension. Chapter 14:27. The human who was being chased by the Shark Clan was saved by the Sky Cloud Sword Saint, Emobayun. Emobayun appeared and killed the saint-level expert of the Shark Clan with a snap of his fingers. The Shark Clan army did not dare to stop him. According to rumors, the Sky Cloud Sword Saint, Emobayun's actions were ordered by the Heavenly Sword Saint. The Heavenly Sword Saint will take the Nirvana realm human who killed a large number of the sea race as his disciple. While Chumu was in the Sky Sword Island, various news spread in the outside world. All of them were related to Chumu, the Sky Cloud Sword Saint, Emobayun, and the Heavenly Sword Saint. He is so lucky. Yeah, he was surrounded by the Shark Clan army, but Emobayun saved him. What's more, he is going to be taken in as a disciple by the Heavenly Sword Saint. From then on, he will soar into the sky and be able to do whatever he wants in the blue sea. It was unknown how many people were envious and jealous. Compared to the human race's enthusiasm, envy, and jealousy, the Shark Clan's reaction was different. They were incomparably furious. The other sea races were gloating, but they also shared a common enemy. On the Sky Sword Peak, two sword light intertwined. One sword light was blazing like fire. Each sword contained a terrifying power, like an erupting volcano that could destroy the heavens and the earth. The sword light was sharp to the extreme. Every thrust of the sword contained an incomparably shocking power. The sharpness of the sword light could penetrate everything, even the void. The sword that was blazing like an erupting volcano was Yang Yuchen's sword. The sword that could pierce through anything was Chu Mu's sword. Yang Yuchen was a 5-star sword saint. If he used his true strength, he could kill Chu Mu with one sword. The battle between him and Chu Mu was purely a battle of sword skills. Emobayun and the Heavenly Sword Saint were watching not far away. The two sword light had their own characteristics, and they were both exquisite and powerful. His sword skills can actually contend with junior brother Yang. How shocking! Emobayun exclaimed. Heaven Sword Saint Master didn't say anything. He just watched. Immediately after, a scene that shocked Emobayun appeared. His junior brother, Yang Yuchen, was actually at a disadvantage. Under Chu Mu's sword skills, he was suppressed. He could only continuously defend, unable to truly counterattack. And every time before he could completely counterattack, he would be suppressed by Chu Mu again. How could this be? Emobayun lost his composure. His eyes widened in shock. He couldn't understand how a sword cultivator at the 8th sky of Nirvana realm could suppress a 5-star sword saint, Yang Yuchen, in terms of swordsmanship. After all, Yang Yuchen wasn't an ordinary sword saint. He was the personal disciple of Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable. He had amazing talent in swordsmanship. Heavenly Sword Holy Master's eyes sparkled as he nodded. Indeed, as expected of the inheritor of the true God Sword sect. On the path of the sword, he had astonishing talent. His sword technique was incomparably profound. With his insight, he could naturally see that Chu Mu did not use his full strength in the sword technique battle against Yang Yuchen. Now, he only used a little bit of his strength, and he was able to suppress Yang Yuchen. Heaven Sword Holy Master's eyes were much sharper than Emobayun's. He could see more. His eyes shone. He had an urge to accept Chu Mu as his personal disciple. However, he immediately suppressed this urge. He'd better wait until the battle between Chu Mu and Yang Chenyu ended. Yang Yuchen was extremely shocked. He was actually suppressed. In terms of swordsmanship, he was suppressed by a junior who was far weaker than him. He couldn't believe it, but it was the truth. Chu Mu stabbed out with his sword. It was a sharpness that could pierce through everything. It was the sword piercing true intent. Yang Yuchen raised his sword and slashed out. It was a head-on clash. A crisp cracking sound was heard. It was ear-piercing. The terrifying sharpness made Yang Yuchen's expression change drastically. He was sent flying a dozen meters away. Again, apart from the shock, there was also a kind of excitement. Yang Yuchen roared as he gripped his greatsword with both hands. He quickly rushed forward, leaving behind afterimages. His strange footwork allowed him to raise his sword, and the power of his slash reached a terrifying level. It was as if his sword could split a mountain and split the sea. Before the sword arrived, that terrifying pressure had already attacked Chu Mu. It made him feel suffocated. The air in front of him was completely dispersed, turning into a vacuum. He held his breath and squinted his eyes. His body slightly bent down, and his right arm that was holding the sword moved back. It was an extremely tense posture. It was a posture where he could stab out his sword in an instant. This sword had the sword-piercing true intent. Its power would definitely reach the peak. Before the sword was shot out, that condensed sharpness had already made a small mark in the space under the sword. It would definitely be a shocking collision. Mo Baiyun opened his eyes wide. Suddenly, an earth-shattering rumble was heard. It was as if thunder had exploded beside his ears. It was accompanied by an extremely terrifying aura. It was as if thousands of huge waves had merged into one and rolled out, destroying everything in its path. The shocking aura also disrupted Yang Yuchen and Chu Mu's aura. They stopped and turned their heads to look outside. Outside the Sky Sword Island, it was originally calm and tranquil. However, at this moment, huge waves were surging towards the sky. Those huge waves were at least 100 meters tall, and there were even huge waves that were 1,000 meters tall. Wave after wave surged towards the Sky Sword Island from afar. The sword intent that covered the outside of Sky Sword Island was originally hidden in the vacuum. It could not be seen or touched. At this moment it shone with light. It swam rapidly and shattered all the huge waves that were coming towards them. However, the huge waves were endless. It was as if they were going to pour all the water in the blue sea and crush Sky Sword Island with the power of the blue sea. Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable frowned. He was the one who had set up the sword intent around Sky Sword Island. As Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable, who would dare to provoke him in the blue sea, he immediately eliminated the other 4 Saint Venerables from the human race. The only one who would do this was the ancestor of the Sea tribe, who was equivalent to the human race's Saint Venerables. Emperor Shark Gua, since you're here, don't hide yourself. Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable spoke. His voice was calm, but it spread far and wide. I, Emperor Shark Gua, don't hide myself. A loud and unruly voice resounded through the heavens and earth, accompanied by waves of surging ocean waves. Wave after wave, the waves continued endlessly. Even Chu Mu was hit by the impact. He only felt his mental world being shaken and felt a little uncomfortable. Fortunately, his spiritual world was originally bigger and tougher than cultivators of the same level. After being refined by the divine light intent and divine darkness intent, it was further strengthened. Finally, it was tempered by the eternal sword intent. Its toughness increased once again. It was now comparable to the spiritual world of a saint expert. Emperor Shark Ancestor! Mo Baiyun exclaimed. Emperor Shark Ancestor was the ancestor of the Shark tribe. He was equivalent to the human race's Saint Venerables. Emperor Shark Ancestor had been in seclusion for thousands of years. However, many people still remembered his ferocious name. Back then, his hands were stained with the blood of the human race. No one knew how many humans had died in his hand. His appearance this time and his arrival at Heavenly Sword Island was probably for Chu Mu. Chu Mu also thought of this. The number of Shark Tribe warriors who had died under his sword and the Shadow Sword was more than 100,000. Among them, there were hundreds of saint experts. They had brought great losses to the Shark Tribe. This was a blood feud. The Shark Tribe wouldn't let it go so easily. The other members of the Shark Tribe couldn't do anything to Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable. They could only send Emperor Shark Ancestor. A 3,000-meter-tall wave surged over, shattering all the waves in front of it. Finally, it stopped outside Sky Sword Island. A figure stood on top of the wave. That figure was very tall, more than 2 meters tall. His body was very robust. His body was covered in black and red scales. He looked very domineering and ferocious. A bloody aura surrounded him. It was as if there were waves of ghostly cries. Those were the cries of the vengeful souls killed by Emperor Shark Gua. Emperor Shark Gua was wearing battle armor and a sharp helmet. Only a pair of sharp and ferocious eyes could be seen. He looked ferocious as he crossed the distance of 10,000 meters and landed on Chu Mu. Chu Mu shuddered. He felt as if a blood shark several hundred meters long was charging towards him with its mouth wide open. It wanted to devour him in one bite. Each of its teeth was as sharp as a small mountain. It could easily crush him to pieces. Stab! He bit the tip of his tongue. The pain woke him up instantly. He immediately activated the sword intent. The sword intent condensed into a sword and stabbed out, piercing through the several hundred-meter-tall blood shark. Everything in front of him disappeared, as if it was just an illusion. However, Chu Mu knew that it wasn't an illusion. It was Emperor Shark Old Ancestor's mental pressure and impact. If he couldn't withstand it, his mental state would be damaged. A Saint Venerate expert actually attacked him like this. It should be infuriating. However, Chu Mu wasn't angry. He had an irreconcilable grudge with the shark tribe. It was just that he wasn't strong enough right now. Heaven Sword Saint Venerate was furious. The Emperor Shark tribe's old ancestor was actually plotting against a junior. Moreover, it was right under his nose. Flying up, Heaven Sword Saint Venerate faced Emperor Shark Old Ancestor. He reached out and grabbed at the void. Instantly, he grabbed the hilt of a sword and pulled it out. The void was like a scabbard. The sound of friction rang out. It was very obscure and made one's scalp tingle. A bright sword was held in Heaven Sword Saint Venerate's hand. Sword light condensed on the sword. Chu Mu's eyes lit up. This meant that Heaven Sword Saint Venerate's control of power had reached a level that Chu Mu hadn't reached yet. Mo Baiyun and Yang Yuchen also stared with their eyes wide open. Heaven Sword Saint Venerate and Emperor Shark Old Ancestor were both supreme existences that surpassed the Saint realm. Now that the two groups were facing each other, it seemed like a huge battle would break out. It was a rare opportunity. Chu Mu's heartbeat rapidly sped up and became increasingly powerful. The blood in his body sped up and was about to boil. The fight between sacred venerables was about to begin. This was probably the first time he had seen such experts fight. Just the way Heaven Sword Saint Venerate held the sword gave him a mysterious feeling. His control of power was something that Chu Mu yearned for. Chapter 1428. On the Sky Sword Island, an expert stood upright in the void, holding a shining sword in his hand and pointing it downwards diagonally. On the 3,000-meter-tall wave stood a tall figure wearing a black and red ferocious armor. He stretched out his hands and grabbed at the left and right side. His murderous aura surged as he grabbed the handle with both arms and pulled it out forcefully. Blood-red light filled the sky. It was a shocking sight. Ghostly cries could be heard as the waves surged. Two blood-red blades appeared in Emperor Shark Old Ancestor's hands. These two sabers looked exactly the same. They were over a meter long, and the head of the saber was like a giant shark. The body of the saber was covered with serrated teeth, and the back of the saber had barbs. It looked like a very strange saber. Ordinary people would not be able to use it at all, and if they could use it, the power of the saber technique would be very terrifying. Slaughtering dual blades. Mo Baiyun squinted his eyes and said in shock. Slaughtering dual blades was the name of the strange blades in Emperor Shark Old Ancestor's hands. Back then, Emperor Shark Old Ancestor had used them to kill many human experts. Li Jing, hand over that Nirvana human obediently. Otherwise, I will destroy Sky Sword Island. Emperor Shark Old Ancestor pointed his blades at Sky Sword Saint Master. His aura was terrifying and ferocious. Lan Hai roared, as if he was responding to Emperor Shark Old Ancestor and cheering him on. Li Zheng was Sky Sword Saint Master's name. Not many people knew about it. You will be the second Ocean Tribe Old Ancestor to be killed by my sword, Sky Sword Saint Master said indifferently. With the sword in his hand, he seemed to have entered a special state. He was not sad, not happy, not shocked, not angry. He seemed to be in heaven. Once, there was indeed an Ocean Tribe Old Ancestor who had died under Sky Sword Saint Master's sword. However, that Ocean Tribe Old Ancestor had just ascended and was not as powerful as Emperor Sharkgua. Arrogant! Emperor Sharkgua roared. He moved his arms and the slaughtering dual blades shone with blood-red light. Blood-red blade light tore through the sky and exploded. It turned into countless blades and shot towards Sky Sword Saint Master. Every blood-red blade light contained a terrifying power that could easily kill a powerhouse like Mo Baiyun. If the Heavenly Sword Mountain was hit, it would immediately crumble and be destroyed. This was the power of a holy venerate. Heaven Sword Saint Master looked indifferent as he swung the sword in his hand and slashed out. There was no startling light or energy fluctuation. This sword was like a breeze blowing by, like smoke spreading out. The blood-red sword light that was like a rainstorm melted like snow under the scorching sun. It was like smoke being blown away by the wind, disappearing from the heaven and earth. Emperor Shark Great Ancestor disappeared. Only the 3,000-meter-tall wave seemed to be frozen in the void. Next to Heavenly Sword Saint Master, a blood-red light appeared out of nowhere and slashed towards him. That blood-red light spun at a high speed. It was Emperor Shark Forefather's slaughtering dual blades. It was unknown when he had approached Heavenly Sword Saint Master and launched a swift and fierce attack. Heavenly Sword Saint Master blocked every attack with his sword. Then, he thrust out his sword, using the sword-piercing intent. Silently, the sword pierced through the void. A black and red figure was forced back. It was Emperor Shark Old Ancestor. While flying back, Sky Sword Saint Master Old Ancestor slashed down with his slaughtering dual blades. Sky Sword Saint Master Old Ancestor was killed. The massive blood-red saber light slashed downwards and upwards, completely sealing off the sky and earth. There was nowhere to dodge. This was an incredibly terrifying killing move. Mo Baiyun, Yang Yuchen, and Chu Mu felt suffocated. Just a trace of aura from the slaughtering dual blades was enough to terrify them. Their divine souls shook. Sky Sword Saint Master Old Ancestor was slashed open. A huge blood-red crack appeared. Sky Sword Saint Master Old Ancestor was slashed open. Sky Sword Saint Master Old Ancestor was slashed open. Sky Sword Saint Master Old Ancestor looked serious for the first time. The Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable raised his sword and made a strange gesture. It looked strange, but it seemed to be in harmony with the heaven and earth. At that moment, the Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable's aura seemed to have merged with the heaven and earth. The sword drew an arc, as if it had cut a circle in the sky. The power of the world was completely attracted and gathered on the sword. The sword light was clear, and a trace of silver light flowed like autumn water. It emitted an aura that was similar to sword force, but far surpassed sword force, causing the sword to become even sharper. The circle shrank to a point and finally condensed at the tip of the sword. This was the heavenly sword, the sword of the heavens. The sword pierced out with the power of heaven and earth. The blood-red saber light cut through heaven and earth. The sword of the heavenly Tao condensed the power of heaven and earth. Under this sword strike, the two terrifying blood-red blade lights shattered and exploded. The power of the sword of heavenly Tao was greatly reduced, but the remaining power still pierced towards Emperor Sharkgua. Shock flashed through Emperor Sharkgua's eyes. He quickly crossed his slaughtering dual blades in front of his chest to block the sword of heavenly Tao. The terrifying power came and condensed into a point, causing the slaughtering dual blades to bend inwards. Emperor Shark Gua roared and flicked his slaughtering dual blades. Under the explosion of power, he was sent flying. Li Jing, it has been many years since we last met. You have become so much stronger. Emperor Shark Gua's eyes gradually turned red. It has been many years since we last met. How much has your strength increased? The Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable said calmly. As soon as he finished speaking, he slashed out with his sword. Under the fluctuation of sword intent, the slash was extremely powerful, as if it could cut the sky apart and merge with the heaven and earth. Sword intent. Chu Mu exclaimed. Swords had stabbing, slashing and so on. Each of them had its own sword intent. Chu Mu had only grasped the sword intent at the beginning. He did not know when he would be able to grasp the sword intent. Grasping the sword intent would increase the power of the sword. The Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable's sword slashed down. Under the sword intent could control all kinds of power. Its power was boundless. Emperor Shark Ancestor slashed out with his dual blades. Blood-red blade lights filled the air like rainbows, illuminating half of the sky. The blue sea water below surged violently, turning into huge waves. The blood-colored saber light was sliced apart by the sword. However, the momentum of the sword did not stop there. Instead, the sword continued to press down. Emperor Shark fell into the sea with a loud splash, and the waves continued to surge. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. Time passed slowly, but Emperor Shark Ancestor did not appear. The waves gradually calmed down and returned to normal. It was as calm as a huge gem. Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable had killed Emperor Shark Ancestor with a single slash? Impossible. After all, they were at the same level. It was impossible for him to kill Emperor Shark Ancestor with a single slash. Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable's eyes shone brightly as he stared at the sea. He knew that Emperor Shark Ancestor was not dead. He was not hurt at all. As for why he did not appear after falling into the sea, he did not know the reason. Unknowingly, traces of pressure spread out from the sea. The pressure grew stronger and stronger. The sea surface became calmer and calmer. The sea water stopped flowing, as if it was frozen. It was terrifying. Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable snorted. His voice was low, but it was extremely powerful. It was as if the sky was responding to him. A thick bolt of lightning stretched for hundreds of miles, tearing the sky apart. Then, there was an earth-shattering sound, deafening Chu Mu and the other two. That terrifying bolt of lightning made them tremble. Dark clouds appeared out of nowhere. As they rolled, they covered the sky, covering thousands of miles. It was dark and gloomy, as if it was going to break the sea. It was as if an ancient mountain was falling down. Countless bolts of lightning shuttled through the dark clouds like lightning dragons. God, it seemed to be angry. Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable had received the inheritance of an ancient sword sect called Heavenly Law Sword Sect. Heavenly Law Sword Sect practiced the sword of heavenly law and enforced justice on behalf of God. Hence, when he was angry, it was like the anger of heaven and earth. He raised his sword and pointed it at the sky. Suddenly, countless thick lightning dragons rushed out from the dark clouds and rushed down. This scene was reflected in Chu Mu and the other two's eyes. It was imprinted in their minds. They would never forget it. This was the power of a Saint Venerable. Even Mo Baiyun and Yang Yuchen were shocked. Although they were Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable's disciples, they had never seen Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable attack with such power. Fighting against him was like fighting against heaven and earth. Countless lightning dragons hit the sword in Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable's hand. They were absorbed directly, turning into strands of pure lightning power. Heavenly Law Sword Sect was named after Heavenly Law. Lightning was the typical representative of Heavenly Law. This lightning was not ordinary lightning. It was Heavenly Law lightning. At the same time, a huge black shadow appeared on the surface of the sea that was as still as a huge sapphire. The black shadow quickly rose from the bottom of the sea and rushed out of the sea. A huge amount of seawater was pushed up into the sky. Among the countless white waves, a huge black and red figure broke out of the sea and rushed towards Heavenward Saint Master. The huge black and red figure carried a thunderous and terrifying might, shattering everything. The seawater fell, revealing the huge figure. It was a huge shark that was more than 1,000 meters long. The shark was black and red, and its body was covered with scales. It also had a horn, and its eyes were blood-red like 2 rubies. The aura that the 1,000-meter-long shark gave off was boundless. It could easily crush a 9-star saint. It could injure a 9-star saint and kill a person just by touching it. Under the terrifying power of the impact, the thick and heavy dark clouds in the sky were directly shattered and dissipated, revealing the blue sky. This giant shark was Patriarch Emperor Shark's giant shark form. It was a secret art he cultivated. After his bloodline ancestral awakening, his power would continue to increase, making him even more terrifying. Sword of Heavenly Law's Wrath. Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable's sword slashed down heavily and stabbed downwards. In an instant, the sword turned into a huge Heavenly Law lightning sword. The space under the sword shattered and the pitch-black cracks spread downwards. The aura had already caused the seawater below to collapse. The huge Heavenly Law lightning sword clashed with the 1,000-meter-long shark that Emperor Shark Ancestor had transformed into. Silence. Heaven and earth lost all color. In front of Chu Mu and the other 2 was boundless. They hurriedly closed their eyes, not daring to look anymore. Chapter 1429. The rumbling of thunder resounded in the sky, lingering in the ears for a long time. Only the white light after the collision filled the sky. The aura spread in all directions. Even from 10,000 miles away, one could feel the terrifying ripples. The sharpness filled the sky, causing fear in all directions. What a terrifying energy ripple! Which super sword saint did it? The faces of all the experts who sensed this wave of energy changed drastically. They were extremely shocked. Master's aura. Somewhere in the sea, a sword saint raised his head and murmured. Li Jing has drawn his sword. Who is it? An ancient whisper sounded on an isolated island and then drifted away with the wind. With a loud sound, the huge figure fell into the sea. The white light dissipated, and the sky returned to its original color. The dark clouds in the sky had already dispersed, and the lightning disappeared. The sky was clear as if a layer had been blown away. Heavenly Sword Saint Master held his sword and stood in the sky. His robe fluttered without wind, and his expression was indifferent. However, his face was a bit pale, but it quickly recovered. Below, in the deep blue sea, there were traces of blood spreading out. It was a color that was almost dark red. As it spread out, it dyed a large portion of the sea red, and it continued spreading further and further away. That blood was the blood of Emperor Shark Old Ancestor. The wrath of the heavens sword was extremely terrifying, and it had injured Emperor Shark Old Ancestor. Li Jing, I will repay you for what you did today. A voice came from the deep blue sea. It was Emperor Shark Old Ancestor's voice, and it contained anger and ruthlessness. Using the environment of the deep blue sea, Emperor Shark Old Ancestor quickly left. He had an advantage in the water. Heavenly Sword Saint Master did not chase after him, because he knew that the reason why he could injure Emperor Shark Old Ancestor was partly due to luck. In fact, their strengths were on par. If he entered the sea, he would be suppressed by Emperor Shark Old Ancestor. It was an unprecedented battle. From the beginning to the end, it was very short. Both sides had only attacked a few times, but the process was unforgettable. It was like a brand that was engraved in the minds of Chu Mu, Mo Baiyun and Yang Yuchen. A battle between experts would always be filled with endless mysteries. These mysteries could be used as a reference and a target for one's own comprehension. Especially Heavenly Sword Saint Master, who was an extremely powerful sword cultivator, a sword cultivator who had surpassed the saint level. Chu Mu and the other two were also sword cultivators. Hence, Heavenly Sword Saint Master's battle had brought them greater benefits. With a move, the Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable disappeared. In the next breath, he appeared before Chu Mu and the other two. Little friend, are you willing to comprehend the Sword of the Heavens? Heaven's Word Saint Master looked at Chu Mu. His first sentence made Chu Mu and the other two tremble. They were very surprised. The Sword of the Heavenly Way was called the Heavenly Sword. It was the origin of the Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable's fame. It was also his way of the sword since he became famous. It was the foundation of the inheritance he had obtained in his early years. For example, the light sword Saint Xiaozhenkong's light sword steel was even more precious than the light sword steel. Mo Baiyun and Yang Yuchen both comprehended the Sword of the Heavens. However, the Sword of the Heavens comprehended by different people would be different. For example, Mo Baiyun and Yang Yuchen both comprehended the Sword of the Heavens. However, one was as flexible and tough as a cloud, while the other was as fierce and violent as a volcano. Heavenly Sword Saint Master's Sword of the Heavens was like the thunder of the heavens. Although they were shocked, Mo Baiyun and Yang Yuchen did not say anything to stop him. This was different from Xiaozhenkong's disciples. Chu Mu was naturally moved. He wanted to experience various sword skills and sword principles to create a sword skill that was suitable for him. He wanted to fully display the power of his sword. The Sword of the Heavens was undoubtedly one of them. Especially after seeing the Heavenly Sword Saint Master's Heavenly Sword might, he was even more interested. Hearing what the Heavenly Sword Saint Master had said, Chu Mu was shocked and pleasantly surprised. "Thank you, Senior." He quickly bowed to the Heavenly Sword Saint Master. "Follow me," the Heavenly Sword Saint Master said faintly. He raised his hand and pointed his finger forward. His finger drew across the void. The void was torn apart and stretched, forming a light gate. Heavenly Sword Saint Sovereign took a step forward and stepped into the door of light. Chu Mu followed. Mo Baiyun and Yang Yuchen didn't move. They knew what was inside the door of light because they had entered before, and not just once. "Eldest senior brother, do you think Chu Mu will become our junior brother?" Yang Yuchen asked. Chu Mu is a human. He is not afraid of the sea race. He dares to wave his sword at the sea race. He is extremely courageous and has a tough heart. There is no doubt that he is talented in sword Dao. You and I cannot compare to him. Even third junior brother cannot compare to him. Mo Baiyun spoke highly of Chu Mu. "I think Master will be happy to accept Chu Mu as his disciple. I am also happy to have such a talented junior brother. Maybe when Chu Mu comes out of the Sky Sword Empty World, he will be our junior brother." Yang Yuchen laughed and said, "This place is called the Sky Sword Empty World. I created it to store the Sky Sword." The Heavenly Sword Saint Master said to Chu Mu. The empty world was an illusory world. It was not big, only tens of thousands of square meters. It was created by the Heavenly Sword Saint Master. Only the Heavenly Sword Saint Master could enter it. In the empty world, there were flowers, trees, rocks, rivers, and waterfalls. However, the flowers, trees, rocks, and rivers all emitted a kind of aura. It was sharp like a sword. The Sky Sword is in the center of the empty world. Go and comprehend it, the Heavenly Sword Saint Master said. He let Chu Mu go alone and left the Sky Sword Empty World. Chu Mu looked around and spread out his soul consciousness. Suddenly, his face changed. The grass not far from him was green and full of vitality. At first glance, he thought it was real grass. However, when he spread out his soul consciousness, he realized that it was not real grass. It was grass made of sword chi and emitted a shocking sharpness. Not only the grass, but the trees were also made of sword chi. The trunks, branches, leaves, and even the dewdrops on the leaves were all made of sword chi. The rocks were also made of sword chi. The patterns on them were very clear, as if they were real rocks. The river in the distance was formed by the flow of sword chi. The falling waterfall was like the galloping of thousands of soldiers and horses, but it was also the impact of the flowing water formed by sword chi. Even the ground beneath his feet, the sand and stones, were all made of sword chi. Chumu even suspected whether this heavenly sword void world was also made of sword aura. Exhaling, Chumu relaxed. He stepped forward and went to the center of the empty world. There was a small mountain in the center of the empty world. It was about 1,000 meters high. Soon, Chumu arrived at the foot of the mountain. The mountain was 1,000 meters high. It was barren and very steep. Chumu raised his head and looked up. His body moved and he leaped up. However, he was suppressed by a force and fell back down. After trying a few times, Chumu finally realized that this mountain could only be reached by climbing. The steep mountain walls and protruding rocks were like sharp swords, emitting shocking fluctuations. Chumu began to climb. When his hands landed on the mountain walls, he felt like he was holding a sharp sword. If he was not careful, his hands would be cut. Carefully climbing, Chumu suddenly had a strange feeling. He seemed to understand something. However, when he thought about it carefully, he realized that he did not understand anything. Abandoning all distracting thoughts, Chumu continued to climb. Suddenly, he stopped. This was because he realized that there was no way to continue. The protruding rocks above were like sharp swords. If he stretched out his hand, it would be cut in half by the sharp swords. This was a feeling. Chumu was not sure if it was an illusion or real. Looking at the other protruding rocks, Chumu suddenly understood. The process of climbing this mountain was like fighting with sword experts one after another. Every protruding rock that could be climbed was a peerless divine sword, a sword that could perform marvelous sword techniques and sword moves. If he wanted to climb, he had to deal with them. He had to either dodge or resolve them. Only then could he reach the peak of this 1,000-meter-high mountain. With this kind of understanding, he had a better goal and a better method to climb up the mountain. The rocks in his eyes turned into peerless sword moves. Chumu could vaguely see a peerless sword cultivator attacking him. Stretching out his hand, his palm changed many times in an instant, changing its path and resolving the other party's sword. Furthermore, he successfully landed on a protruding rock. With a bit of strength, he climbed up again, one step closer to the peak. One step at a time they climbed. The higher they climbed, the more profound the sword moves displayed by the rocks became. They became harder to dodge and harder to block. For a sword cultivator like Chumu, 1,000-meter-high mountain could be reached in the blink of an eye, even if he had to climb. However, this mountain was different. It was filled with mystery and danger. After an hour, Chumu had only climbed 300 meters. There was still a long way to go before he reached the peak. He had already stopped at 700 meters for quite some time. Chumu was still staring at a rock above him. He could touch it if he stretched out his hand and then use it to climb up. However, Chumu did not stretch out his hand because he was not confident. The sword remained motionless. However, Chumu knew that if he stretched out his hand, the sword would definitely come slashing at him. His mind spun rapidly, and all sorts of countermeasures flashed in his mind. Suddenly, he stretched out his hand and grabbed at the rock. Chumu's 5 fingers moved rapidly. They looked messy, but in fact they contained some kind of mysterious pattern. The muscles on his hand also trembled, adjusting the angle of his hand. The rock turned into a sword and slashed at him. Chumu's hand was like a sword, clashing with it invisibly. There was no sword hum, nor was there any sparks. It was silent and abnormally dangerous. It seemed like a long time had passed, but it was also just a short 3 breaths of time. Chumu's hand successfully landed on the protruding rock and grabbed it tightly. Chapter 1430. On the Sky Sword Peak of the Sky Sword Island. Junior brother, why don't we make a guess and a bet? Mo Bayun suddenly said with a smile. In the eyes of others, he was a carefree person. However, those who knew him well knew that he was not only carefree, but also carefree. He never cared about what others thought of him. Moreover, he had a hobby, which was gambling. According to him, gambling a little was good for the mood. Since senior brother is in the mood, junior brother will naturally accompany you. Yang Yuchen's eyes lit up. Let's bet on how many hours Chu Mu will take to reach the sky sword peak in the ethereal extent, Mo Baiyan said. Sure. Yang Yuchen smiled and said, I'm guessing that Chu Mu will need to use 72 hours to reach the top of Heavenly Sword's small peak. I guess about 24 hours, Mo Baiyan said. 32 hours meant 3 days, and 24 hours meant 2 days. Senior brother is very confident in Chu Mu. However, you and I both know how difficult it is to climb the sky sword peak. It's not that easy. Yang Yuchen was surprised at first, then said, the Heavenly Sword small peak was created by Master by imitating the Heavenly Sword peak of the ancient Heavenly Sword sect. Although it is far inferior to the Heavenly Sword peak, its power is still unpredictable. You'll know later, Mo Baiyan said with a smile. In the sky sword ethereal extent, 900 meters above the sky sword peak, Chu Mu's body stopped again. The higher he went, the more exquisite and powerful the sword art was, and the harder it was to resist. With every step, Chu Mu had to stop and think about how to deal with the sword art's attack. Unknowingly, Chu Mu's understanding of sword art had deepened. The sword shadows in his mind had fused further, and the sword thrust intent had improved. Grabbing the rock, he pulled with force and took another step forward. Time passed. In the blink of an eye, 24 hours had passed. Chu Mu was still climbing. Stab! He did not use his sword. He only used his hand as a sword and stabbed upwards. Under the sword thrust intent, it pierced through everything and pressed forward. 30 top sword steals, sky attack sword style. It was as if this sword could even break the sky. After grasping the silent sword style, Chu Mu also grasped the sky strike sword style. The silent sword style was silent, hard to detect, and impossible to guard against. On the other hand, the sky strike sword style had a shocking momentum and tyrannical power. It was easier to guard against, but if one didn't have enough strength, they wouldn't be able to defend against it. Both sword styles had their own advantages, but the similarity was that they were both based on the stabbing formula of sword arts, using the tip of the sword to attack. 999 meters. Only by alternating between the silent sword style and the sky strike sword style did he manage to reach this place with much difficulty. He was only 1 meter away from the summit. However, to Chu Mu, this 1 meter felt like a natural moat. Within 1 meter, there was only one protruding rock. It looked very ordinary, but in Chu Mu's eyes, it was like a peerless divine sword. Vaguely, he saw a peerless sword cultivator holding this sword, quietly waiting for the arrival of a challenger. Although Chu Mu couldn't feel any aura, he didn't dare to act rashly. That feeling was indescribable. He quietly pondered and observed. This time, it took a full hour before Chu Mu moved. He took the initiative to attack, his fingers together like a sword piercing upwards. Silent sword style, silent sword style. Who knew that the moment Chu Mu made his move, his opponent had already reacted. He slashed with his sword at an incredible angle, and there was no way to dodge. Exerting force on both his feet, he firmly stepped on the mountain wall. He quickly raised his left hand and pierced out with his sword fingers. Wind and thunder surged, and the sky fell and the earth cracked. Sky strike sword style. It seemed like a sword that could even break the sky, piercing towards his opponent's sword. When they collided, the power of the sky strike sword style burst out. Chu Mu only felt that his sword fingers had pierced something hard, and his fingertips were stinging. The silent sword style hit his opponent's figure, penetrating through it. It was actually an afterimage. Realizing that something was wrong, he ignored the stinging pain on his left hand and pierced out again. Silent sword style. He quickly retracted his right hand's sword fingers and seized the opportunity. Sky strike sword style. Alternating between the silent sword style and the sky strike sword style, Chu Mu finally defeated his opponent. His fingertips were bleeding. Grabbing the rock, he exerted force and jumped up, finally reaching the top of the mountain. The blood on his fingertips had disappeared. The previous injury seemed to be just an illusion. The top of the mountain was very small, only less than 10 meters in radius. In the center, a sword was suspended 3 feet from the ground. The head of the sword was facing up, and the body of the sword was facing down. The sword was broken. The tip and edge of the sword were cut off, and it was unknown where they were. The remaining part was still emitting a shocking sharpness. Looking at it, one would feel a stinging pain, as if they were cut by the sword chi. Closing his eyes, tears seeped out of the corners of his eyes. His eyes were sore and stinging, and it was very uncomfortable. After a full quarter of an hour, he recovered and opened his eyes again. This time, Chu Mu was well prepared. The power of the eternal sword will cover the surface of his eyes layer by layer. It would not hinder his vision, but it could protect his eyes. Looking at the floating broken sword again, it was still as sharp as before. Chu Mu still felt a stinging pain in his eyes. However, with the protection of the eternal sword will, it was much better. At least, he could look at it directly. Looking at the broken sword carefully, Chu Mu could feel a terrifying heavenly might on it. This broken sword seemed to represent the sky, the vault of heaven, and the heavenly Tao. Sitting down cross-legged in front of the broken sword, he began to comprehend the mysteries of the broken sword. This broken sword was the heavenly sword, the inheritance of the ancient heavenly Tao sword sect. It was the strongest sword of the ancient heavenly Tao sword sect, and it possessed an unfathomable heavenly might. However, this sword was cut in half. Looking at how smooth the cut was, it must have been cut in half by some kind of sharp weapon. What kind of weapon could have such terrifying power? Even though it was just a broken sword, it still possessed a terrifying power that Chu Mu could not resist. Facing it was like facing the heavenly Tao. This feeling was not inferior to facing the heavenly sword saint's fury of the heavenly Tao. From this, one could infer that the complete heavenly sword was even more powerful than the heavenly sword saint. Unfathomable heavenly might. Gradually, Chu Mu entered a state of comprehension. This was all thanks to his shocking comprehension ability. Once he entered the state of comprehension, Chu Mu felt that his thoughts and his consciousness had traveled through time and space, returning to the ancient times. The land was vast and the sky was boundless. It was vast and ancient. There was a mountain that was bare and without any flowers or trees. The mountain was steep, and it was like a huge sword that was stabbed into the vast land. It was majestic and lofty, and it pierced through the clouds. There were no stairs on the precipitous mountain, only countless protruding rocks that gradually rose from the bottom to the top of the clouds. The mountain was shaped like a giant sword and was extremely steep. It was at least 10,000 meters tall. This mountain was called the Heavenly Tao Sword Peak, and it was the place of inheritance of the Heavenly Tao Sword sect. Chu Mu's consciousness traveled through time and arrived here. His gaze landed on the Heavenly Tao Sword Peak. Unknowingly, many figures appeared on the Heavenly Tao Sword Peak, and they were trying their best to climb up. They were the disciples of the Heavenly Tao Sword sect. The disciples of the Heavenly Tao Sword sect were climbing up step by step. Some of them stopped after climbing for a while, thinking about how to deal with it. Some of them were faster and quickly climbed up, but they also stopped after a while. Chu Mu's consciousness moved and the world spun. His consciousness rapidly advanced, and with a jolt, he entered the body of the disciple who had climbed up the Heavenly Tao Sword Peak. Through sharing, they experienced the feeling of climbing the Heavenly Tao Sword Peak together. Above, there was a protruding rock that turned into a sharp sword and pierced over. It was incomparably mysterious. Chu Mu couldn't deal with it because this wasn't his body. He could only watch and feel a deep sense of empathy. He calmed his heart, neither arrogant nor impatient, and wanted to see how this person would deal with it. That person twisted his body and used a mysterious method to dodge the sword. His sword finger instantly pierced out from under his armpit. The speed was extremely fast, and the angle was strange. He killed his opponent, grabbed the rock, and continued climbing. The person that Chu Mu chose seemed to be an extremely outstanding disciple of the Heavenly Tao Sword sect. He continued climbing, but the higher he climbed, the slower his speed became. Stopping for an hour, stopping for 2 hours, stopping for 4 hours, stopping for half a day, stopping for a day. Chu Mu didn't count the time, and he didn't know how much time had passed. Finally, this disciple of the Heavenly Tao Sword sect reached the top of the Heavenly Tao Sword Peak. At the peak of the Heavenly Tao Sword Peak, a sword floated. It was a complete sword. That disciple walked to the front of the sword and sat down cross-legged, comprehending it. Suddenly, the Heavenly Tao Sword emitted a shocking heavenly might. Chu Mu's consciousness was directly expelled and dissipated. It traveled through time and returned to his body. The Heavenly Tao Sword Peak that he saw in a dream was extremely similar to the Heavenly Tao Sword Peak he climbed. However, the Heavenly Tao Sword Peak was only 1,000 meters long, while the Heavenly Tao Sword Peak was 10,000 meters long. The difference between 1,000 meters and 10,000 meters was 10 times. Then, was the difficulty of climbing also 10 times? No, the difficulty of climbing between 1,000 meters and 10,000 meters wasn't 10 times, but 100 times, 1,000 times. That was because the higher one went, the harder it was to climb. Although Chu Mu didn't intentionally count the time, he could faintly feel that the person he possessed took years to climb from the bottom to the peak. He deeply sympathized with Chu Mu. He wanted Chu Mu to know the difficulty of climbing. If it were him climbing, he would probably have to spend a few months. After reaching the peak of the Heavenly Tao Sword Peak, although it was only an instant, Chu Mu could feel the might of the complete Heavenly Tao Sword Peak. In just a short moment, he could feel the might of the complete Heavenly Tao Sword. It would be of great help to Chu Mu's subsequent comprehension. Sitting before the broken Heavenly Tao Sword, Chu Mu continued to comprehend. The heavenly might was shockingly unfathomable. It was majestic and awe-inspiring. The fury of the sword was the fury of the heavens. The fury of the heavens was the fury of the heavens. The fury of the heavens and the fury of the sword could shatter the earth. There was nothing they couldn't kill. His comprehension gradually deepened. His thoughts broadened. The sword images in his mind gently trembled, releasing gentle sword hums. It was like the music of the way of the sword. The various mysteries of the Heavenly Tao Sword began to appear in Chu Mu's mind. Gradually, a brand new sword image condensed in Chu Mu's mind. Suddenly, a sliver of light appeared at the broken part of the sword. A powerful and strange energy bloomed, disturbing the surroundings and causing the Heavenly Tao Sword to tremble. Under the terrifying energy, Chu Mu was startled awake and forced to retreat. Chapter 1431. Sky Sword Empty World, Below the Sky Sword Small Peak. Chu Mu raised his head and looked at the peak. It was as if he could see the broken sky sword again. He mumbled to himself, what was that power that erupted at the end? His comprehension had been interrupted by that sudden power. The image of the Heavenly Way sword in his mind was extremely blurry, as if it would be blown away by a gust of wind. Compared to the other sword images, it was clearly much weaker. Unfortunately, if his comprehension was not interrupted, he could have successfully condensed the sword image of the Sword of Heavenly Tao. He sensed the sky sword small peak. The broken sky sword was still fighting against that power. The brilliant heavenly might was the power of the sky sword. There was another power that revealed a trace of holiness. There was a sense of superiority in the holiness, as if it was looking down on the world. It was as if the people below it were ants. This power was very unfamiliar and terrifying. It had a hint of the divine light intent, but it was different from the divine light intent. It appeared again. A voice resounded. Chumu looked over. He did not know when the heavenly sword Saint Venerable had appeared beside him. He had a solemn expression as he raised his head and looked at the peak. "Senior, what kind of power is that?" Chumu asked. "I do not know what kind of power it is. I can only say that the sky sword was broken by that power. That power has been left behind, suppressed by the power of the sky sword." The heavenly sword Saint Venerable said slowly, "Perhaps something big happened in the ancient times. Now it is untraceable." He paused. "Originally, I wanted to let you comprehend the sky sword. I did not expect such a thing to happen." The heavenly sword Saint Venerable sighed. He was looking forward to it. With Chumu's talent in the way of the sword, he would definitely gain a lot if he could comprehend the sky sword. Different people would gain different things from comprehending the sky sword. They could complement each other and perfect each other. Chumu had not finished comprehending the sky sword. He had only comprehended half of it. He did not gain much, so he did not say anything more. Once this phenomenon appears, it usually lasts for a few months. It might even last for a few years. The heavenly sword Saint Venerable said, "I cannot comprehend it for now." Since he could not comprehend it, there was no need to stay. Chumu and heavenly sword Saint Master left the sky sword empty world. "Brother Chumu, how long did it take for you to ascend the heaven sword little peak?" The moment Chumu came out, Yang Yuchen immediately opened his mouth to ask. "More than a day. I didn't pay attention to the exact time," Chumu said casually. He really didn't pay attention to the specific time. He vaguely knew that it was more than a day, but it wouldn't be more than a day and a half. In other words, it would be 38 hours. "Haha, eldest senior brother, we were all wrong," Yang Yuchen said with a smile. However, he was extremely shocked. One had to know that he had taken more than 4 days to climb up the Heaven's Pride Peak. His eldest senior brother, Mo Bayun, had been slightly faster than him, but he had still taken 4 days. Only his youngest junior brother had taken the shortest time, only 3 days. He felt that Chumu's talent would be better than youngest junior brothers, but not by much. Therefore, Yang Yuchen guessed that it was 3 days. Mo Bayun had interacted with Chumu more and had a deeper understanding of him. He felt that Chumu's talent was much better than youngest junior brothers, so he guessed that it was 2 days. However, he still thought that it would not be less than 2 days, but between 2 to 3 days. However, he did not expect it to be less than 2 days. The heavenly sword Saint Venerable saw this and smiled, but did not say anything. Chumu continued to stay in the sky sword peak. He cultivated and comprehended every day. In his mind, apart from the top sword shadows, some of the 170 sword shadows had been merged. Then it became 170 sword shadows, then 160 sword shadows, and then 150 sword shadows. The merging of the sword shadows meant that Chumu had a deeper understanding of the sword arts, and he had his own unique understanding. Only then could he merge them together. The 30 top sword shadows still existed because Chumu did not have a deep enough understanding of the sword shadows. Even though he had mastered the silent sword form and the sky attack form, he had not reached the stage where he could completely understand and derive his own understanding of the sword art. If he could fully comprehend the 30 top-notch sword shadows one day, his accumulation and attainments in swordsmanship would definitely reach an astonishing level. In the middle of the 30 top sword shadows was a new sword shadow. It was very blurry, as if it would scatter with a gust of wind. It was the sword shadow of the way of heaven that he had condensed from comprehending the sky sword. Due to the interference, it was very blurry. Perhaps it was because the sky sword was a broken sword, but the blurry sword shadow did not exist at all. It was a pity. Comprehending, cultivating, practicing the sword, and sparring with Yang Yuchen and Mo Bayun, days passed. In the blink of an eye, 7 days had passed. The Sky Sword Peak of the Sky Sword Island was where the Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable's dwelling was located. After thousands of years of being influenced by the Heavenly Sword Saint Venerable's sword intent and sword chi, it had been refined imperceptibly, making it very suitable for practicing the sword. It was like a holy land for sword cultivators. Practicing the sword here was twice the result with half the effort, and he had a deeper understanding of the sword art. Chu Mu directly benefited as well. Practicing the sword in a day was better than practicing it outside for several days. With powerful sword saints like Yang Yuchen and Mo Baiyun as his sparring partners, the efficiency increased by more than 10 times. It was possible to say that practicing the sword here for a day was equivalent to practicing the sword outside for a month. 7 days later, the 100 sword shadows in Chu Mu's head constantly merged, becoming 100. Chu Mu had completely grasped the soundless sword style that he had first grasped. As for the Sky Strike sword style that he had just grasped, he was still in the process of breaking in. Out of the 30 top sword shadows, 3 of them were based on the stab formula. They were the Soundless Sword style, the Sky Strike sword style, and the Star-Shattering sword style that he had yet to grasp. The Soundless sword style's specialty was that it was fast and soundless. It was difficult to detect and defend against. Sometimes one would only react after being hit. The Sky Strike sword style's specialty was its aura. Its aura was vast, and it used its aura to oppress people. Wind and thunder surged, and its power was extremely tyrannical. Its power was extremely terrifying, as if it could even break through the sky. It had a shocking penetrating power, and could pierce through anything. The Star-Shattering sword style's specialty was its power. It was the true condensation of power. In terms of speed and aura, it could not compare with the Soundless sword style and the Sky Strike sword style. However, in terms of the condensation of power, it surpassed both of them. Moreover, the Star-Shattering sword style also had another specialty, which was the origin of its name. After hitting the target, a terrifying power would explode and shatter the target. Even a star would be shattered under the sword. In terms of power, the Sky Strike sword style was better than the Soundless sword style, but it was not as good as the Star-Shattering sword style. In terms of aura, the Sky Strike sword style was the best. In terms of sudden attack, the Soundless sword style was the best. Each had its own advantages. In the recent days of sword practice, Chu Mu had gradually gained a kind of understanding. That was, he had completely grasped the Soundless sword style, the Sky Strike sword style, and the Star-Shattering sword style. He had to completely understand them and derive his own unique understanding. That would be the most suitable understanding for him. Then, he would extract the essence of the 3 sword styles and merge them into one. In the end, he would create the sword style or sword style that was most suitable for him. Soundless, Sky Strike, and Star-Shattering sword style. If I could merge the essence of the 3 sword styles into one, and have the characteristics of the 3 sword styles at the same time, the power would be unimaginable. Chu Mu thought to himself, if the essence of the 3 sword styles were merged into a brand new sword style, the power would definitely be above the 3 sword styles. It would be extremely terrifying. Once mastered, it would definitely be a terrifying sword style that could kill even gods. However, the prospects were great and it made people very motivated. At the same time, it was also very difficult. Just completely grasping the 3 sword styles was the first problem. After completely grasping them, he would derive his own unique understanding, which was the second problem. Extracting the essence of the 3 sword styles was the third problem. The key to creating a perfect sword style, which was the skeleton, was the fourth problem. After extracting the essence of the 3 sword styles, and merging it into the key to creating a sword style, was the fifth problem. Only by solving these 5 problems could he create the perfect sword style in his mind. Practicing the sword, and practicing the sword again. This kind of environment was hard to come by. Once he left this place, he didn't know when he would be able to come back again. Naturally, he had to cherish every second. He couldn't miss it. What a madman! Yang Yuchen said. I thought I was crazy enough to practice the sword. I didn't expect him to be even crazier than me. His talent in the sword is extraordinary, and he's still practicing the sword so crazily. He's using every second of his time. Mo Baiyun was also deeply moved. No wonder. With such a cultivation level, his sword skills are so profound and unfathomable. Even junior brother's obsession with the sword cannot compare to him. Eldest senior brother, don't you think it strange? Take little junior brother for example. He's known as a sword fanatic. His sword is always in his hand and he never leaves it. It's obvious that he's crazy about the sword. However, I feel that compared to Chu Mu, little junior brother's craze for the sword seems to be limited to the surface and not the essence. Yang Yuchen suddenly said with a strange expression. After thinking for a while, he said, Take Chu Mu for example. Normally, you wouldn't be able to tell that he's a sword maniac. When he should be cultivating, when he should be practicing, 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 when he should be exchanging pointers, 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 when he should be exchanging pointers. As Yang Yuchen spoke, her eyes grew brighter and brighter. Vaguely, she seemed to have understood something. She stood in place, suddenly having an epiphany, and slowly closed her eyes. Mo Baiyun listened to Yang Yuchen's words and recalled them in his mind. Suddenly, he understood as well. With a flash of light, he closed his eyes and stood next to Yang Yuchen. He also had an epiphany. The two of them were chosen by Heavenly Sword Saint Master to be his direct disciples. Naturally, they were extraordinary in the Sword Tao. Their comprehension abilities were naturally much better than ordinary sword cultivators. Not bad, not bad. Heavenly Sword Saint Master saw this and smiled. He nodded slightly and said softly. Chapter 1432. Brother Chu, let me introduce you. He is our third junior brother, Ling Fengxiao. Yang Yuchen gestured to the rapidly approaching figure and said to Chu Mu, in the Blue Sea, he has a nickname, Sword Maniac. As soon as Yang Yuchen finished speaking, the newcomer had already arrived in front of Chu Mu's group. Slender figure, elegant and graceful, with fluttering clothes, as if he had come with the wind and was about to leave with the wind. 3-star Sword Saint, Sword Maniac Ling Fengxiao. It's you. Ling Fengxiao was about to greet his eldest senior brother Mo Baiyun and second senior brother Yang Yuchen. When he saw Chu Mu, he was shocked. He remembered it clearly because he was also present at that time. He saw with his own eyes that Chu Mu's group was surrounded by nearly 100,000 Shark Clan warriors. The sudden appearance of the shadow dispersed, and the sword domain covered the entire area, enveloping the 100,000 Shark Clan warriors. Not long after, it dissipated. 100,000 Shark Clan warriors, along with hundreds of saint experts, were all dead. At that time, Ling Fengxiao had also used his divine sense to invade the Black Sword domain. His divine sense was different from the divine sense of an ordinary sword cultivator. It was much more powerful and penetrating. Even so, it was blocked by the Black Sword domain, and couldn't enter it. Naturally, he couldn't analyze the mysteries within. As a sword maniac, Ling Fengxiao had a craziness that others didn't have on the Sword Tao. Just like what Yang Yuchen had said, Ling Fengxiao's sword never left his hand. He was always in contact with it. Because of this, he had an intuition towards the sword. At that time, an Ing had given Ling Fengxiao a great shock. The powerful impact made him understand that there was someone with talent and attainment in the Sword Tao that wasn't inferior to his own. And Ying's powerful strength had also moved Ling Fengxiao's heart. He was eager to exchange sword Dao with an Ing. After that, the Shark clan had mobilized. Even the ferocious Black Gold Shark army had been mobilized, searching everywhere for the whereabouts of these people. Ling Fengxiao had thought that those people were unlucky and would most likely die in the hands of the Shark clan. He had never expected to see one here. Why would an eighth sky of Nirvana realm appear on the Sky Sword Island? Moreover, from the looks of it, he seemed to be quite familiar with eldest senior brother and second senior brother. As the third disciple of the Heavenly Sword Saint, he would often train in the outside world and hide his identity. Many people only thought that Ling Fengxiao was a lone sword cultivator who got lucky. If they knew that he was the third disciple of the Heavenly Sword Saint, who knows how shocked they would be and how many people would try to curry favor with him. Chu Mu didn't understand Ling Fengxiao's exclamation, because he didn't know that Ling Fengxiao was there. Greetings, eldest senior brother, second senior brother. Ling Fengxiao hurriedly saluted Mo Baiyun and Yang Yuchen. Third junior brother, this is Chu Mu. He's a peerless genius whose talent in sword Dao is not inferior to yours, Yang Yuchen said with a smile. Hearing that, Ling Fengxiao's eyes lit up as he looked at Chu Mu. Chu Mu looked back at him fearlessly. One had to know that Ling Fengxiao was a 3-star sword saint, and not just any ordinary 3-star sword saint. As for Chu Mu, he was only at the 8th level of Nirvana realm, yet he was able to face Ling Fengxiao head-on and not be at a disadvantage. An invisible aura spread out as their gazes clashed. Vaguely, there seemed to be lightning flashing in the surroundings. "All right, third junior brother, let's go greet master first," Mo Baiyun said. Ling Fengxiao retracted his gaze and took a deep look at Chu Mu before walking towards the thatched cottage where the Heavenly Sword Saint was. "Master, Fengxiao is back." Ling Fengxiao stood a dozen meters away from the thatched cottage and saluted respectfully. On the Sky Sword Peak, there were a total of 5 thatched cottages. One was the Heavenly Sword Saint's cottage, one was Mo Baiyun's cottage, one was Yang Yuchen's cottage, one was Ling Fengxiao's cottage, and the last one was Chu Mu's cottage. The moon was bright and the stars were sparse. The sea breeze blew gently. A bright moon hung in the sky like a huge silver disk, emitting a faint white moonlight. The moonlight was like quiet water, silently flowing down from the sky and sprinkling over the land. The deep blue sea was covered with a layer of silver gauze. The originally very deep color added a bit of mystery, making people want to delve deeper into it. The Sky Sword Island was also covered by the silver light, as if it was wearing a gauze dress. The Sky Sword Peak was like a beauty under the moon, graceful and outstanding. Under the bright moon, the Heavenly Sword Peak was tranquil and deep. There was a ring of sword light that resonated with the bright moon. The sword light was as white as the faint moonlight, like the autumn water flowing under the bright moon, cold and piercing. Who was practicing sword in the middle of the night? Sword maniac Ling Fengxiao. He held the sword with one hand, as if the sword and his arm had become one. He was the sword was the man and the sword were one. Nothing in the world was immortal except for the sword in his hand. This was Sword Maniac's sword. This was Ling Fengxiao's sword. Unknowingly, a figure appeared not far away, watching the swordsman and the sword of the swordsman. What exquisite swordsmanship! Chu Mu couldn't help but exclaim as he watched. This exquisite swordsmanship wasn't his own, but a kind of exquisite swordsmanship that was continuously studied to an astonishing level. Chu Mu could tell at a glance that Ling Fengxiao's swordsmanship was at the later stage of the union with the sword, close to the peak level. However, his study of swordsmanship was deeper than Chu Mu's back then. Even now, although Chu Mu's swordsmanship level was higher than his, there were still some differences in some aspects. In other words, sword maniac Ling Fengxiao did indeed have his own unique points that Chu Mu could learn from. This was undoubtedly something to be happy about. Ling Fengxiao was immersed in his swordsmanship, and Chu Mu was watching from afar. Unknowingly, time passed. The bright moon in the sky retreated, and the sun rose. The golden-red light shone, replacing the mysterious silver veil. It was grand and majestic, causing the deep blue sea water to reflect a golden-red color, full of vitality. The golden-red sunlight was reflected on Ling Fengxiao's sword. A beautiful and resplendent luster was like the first light of dawn. The sword that was raised was like the rising sun. Immediately, it became blazing, like the scorching sun at noon, and then became restrained, like the setting sun in the west. The power of this sword, after 3 transformations, finally became restrained. It seemed to have weakened, but in reality, it had become even more tyrannical. As the sword slashed out, the golden-red sword light instantly streaked across the sky. It had a mournful and beautiful feeling, like a swan song. Suddenly, Chu Mu's eyes widened, and a trace of shock flashed across his face. This was because he felt a familiar and unique energy fluctuation from Ling Fengxiao's sword light. That sword contained the fluctuation of sword origin, sword intent, rule power, and sword force. There was no fluctuation of true intent, because Ling Fengxiao had yet to grasp true intent. This was not surprising. The only thing that shocked Chu Mu was that there was also the fluctuation of divine sense. That's right, there was indeed the fluctuation of divine sense. Moreover, that divine sense was different from ordinary divine sense. It was a kind of divine sense that carried an astonishing sharpness, like an invisible sword, causing the sharpness of the sword to become even stronger, and complementing the sword force. Infusing divine sense into the sword to increase its power was rare. Most of them were simply infused with divine sense. Therefore, the increase in power was not strong and was not essential. However, the sword skills that were truly infused with profound techniques were usually very terrifying sword skills. Ling Fengxiao's sword made Chu Mu feel terrified. If he was hit by it, it would be difficult or even impossible for him to resist. Even his spiritual world would be impacted, damaged, and shattered. It's not a normal divine sense, but a kind of divine sense that is similar to a sword, Chu Mu said to himself. A divine sense that was similar to a sword was completely different from ordinary divine sense. It was more terrifying and more powerful. As the sun rose and the moon set, Ling Fengxiao was still practicing his sword. Mo Baiyun and Yang Yuchen appeared beside Chu Mu out of nowhere. Junior brother's sword skill has become more profound, Yang Yuchen said. Not only has his sword skill become more profound, that sword just now was infused with his sword mind. Its power has increased a lot, and an ordinary 4-star saint would not be able to resist it, Mo Baiyun said. Sword mind. Chu Mu noticed what Mo Baiyun said. Our junior brother is very talented. His spiritual world is different from the spiritual world of most cultivators. As if sensing Chu Mu's confusion, Mo Baiyun explained simply. He was born to practice the sword. When his divine sense was derived, it automatically mutated into Sword Wei Divine Sense. Sword Wei Divine Sense. Chu Mu repeated, feeling that this name was very appropriate. Sword Wei Divine Sense, we call it Sword Mind for short. Sword Mind is based on a mutation of normal divine sense. It is stronger than normal divine sense, and has the sharpness of a sword. It can be easily infused into sword skills, and can increase the power of the sword, stimulating the sharpness of the sword itself. Mo Baiyun said, actually, other than sword mind, there are other mutated divine senses, such as fire mind, ice mind, thunder mind, and so on. For example, fire mind can obviously increase the power of fire arts, ice mind can increase the power of ice arts, thunder mind can increase the power of thunder arts, and so on. In short, cultivators with mutated divine senses are usually stronger than most ordinary cultivators. Fortunately, mutated divine senses are too difficult. Some have it because they are talented, while others have it because of fortuitous encounters, Mo Baiyun added in the end. Chu Mu was enlightened, and felt that he had gained more knowledge. Sword Wei Divine Sense. Fire Wei Divine Sense. Ice Way Divine Sense. Thunder Way Divine Sense. Different mutated divine consciousnesses had their own characteristics, uniqueness, and unique powers. If my divine sense can also mutate into Sword Way Divine Sense, then I can infuse it into my sword skills. The power of each sword will definitely increase significantly, Chumu thought. Unfortunately, this was only his personal thought. Mo Baiyun, Yang Yuchen, and Heaven's Word Saint Master all wanted to mutate divine sense into Sword Way Divine Sense, but they had no way. It was not that easy. Chapter 1433. Above the vast blue sea, in the azure sky, the water and the sky were almost the same color. Looking from afar, they seemed to be connected. Suddenly, a flowing light streaked across the sky at an indescribable speed. It pierced through the white clouds and shattered them, leaving only a white streak in the sky. It was as if a sword had cut the sky open. After a long time, when the flowing light disappeared, there was a sharp sound that tore through all obstacles. Fast. That light was simply too fast. Many experts flying in the air did not have time to react before the light swept past them. It was so fast that it shocked them. What is that? I don't know. It's so strong. It's a super expert. That aura doesn't seem to belong to an expert. It's like a flying ship, that's right. That extremely fast light was a flying ship. It was a flying ship that was less than 10 meters long and less than 3 meters wide. Its overall shape was flat and narrow, and its edges were very sharp. It was like the blade of a sword. The tip of the flying ship was like the tip of a sword that could easily pierce through the sky. The edges could easily tear through the air, reducing resistance and maximizing the speed of the flying ship. This flying ship was called the Extreme Peak, which meant that it was extremely sharp. There were only 2 people in the flying ship. One was Chumu, and the other was Ling Fengxiao. It turned out that Chumu had stayed in the Sky Sword Island's Sky Sword Peak for nearly half a month. His swordsmanship had improved greatly. Once, when he was chatting with Mo Baiyun and the others, they asked about his background. Only then did Chumu remember the real sword sect. It was not that he had forgotten about the real sword sect. It was just that when he was chased by the Shark Clan army, his mental state was completely tense. He could not tolerate other thoughts. Later, he was rescued by Skycloud Sword Saint Mo Baiyun and brought to Sky Sword Island. The environment of Sky Sword Island was extremely suitable for cultivation. At that time, Chumu, who was eager to improve his strength, cultivated on Sky Sword Island like a fish in water. Every day, his improvement was obvious. He was immersed in it and could not extricate himself. Cultivating, practicing the sword, and exchanging pointers with powerful sword saints. Such days were extremely pleasant. If only Mo Baiyun and the others hadn't asked about Chumu's background. Since he thought of the true sword sect, Chumu also thought of the myriad sect gathering. When he left the true sword sect, he had said that he would lead the true sword sect to participate in the sect of myriad sects gathering and spread the name of the true sword sect across the Kanglan Empire. That way, more people would join the true sword sect, and the number of disciples in the true sword sect would increase as well. Only when there were enough disciples could they develop better. The rise of the true sword sect had to be carried out. This was something he had promised by Ling Chumu. Immediately took his leave, and explained the reason behind it. When the Heaven Sword Saint and the others found out that Chumu was actually a sect master, and that the predecessor of the true sword sect was the true God sword sect that had already disappeared, they were shocked. The Heaven Sword Saint even directly mentioned that he hoped to become a member of the true sword sect. Hearing the Heaven Sword Saint's words, Chumu was shocked. The true sword sect was just a small sect now. However, the Heaven Sword Saint was one of the 5 saint masters of the human race on the Blue Sea. He was a supreme existence that surpassed the saint realm. Even a powerful sect like the Heavenly Saint cult was not worthy of his attention, let alone the true sword sect. Although he was shocked, Chumu seemed to understand what the Heaven Sword Saint meant. Back then, his talent was actually quite ordinary. He wasn't qualified to join the True God Sword sect. Later on, his life was saved by an elder of the True God Sword sect. The elder even gave him pointers on the sword Tao and laid a solid foundation for him. If it wasn't for that, he wouldn't have had the fortuitous encounter and wouldn't have become the Heaven Sword Saint today. He couldn't repay the kindness of saving his life and pointers. Saving Chu Mu was a form of repayment, but he felt that it wasn't enough. The True God Sword sect was the predecessor of the True Sword sect. If it developed, it might not be able to restore part of the glory of the True God Sword sect. The Heaven Sword Saint proposed to join the True Sword sect to fulfill his wish back then. Secondly, it was a form of repayment to a certain extent. With such an expert willing to join, Chu Mu naturally welcomed him with open arms. As for what role the Heaven Sword Saint would take after joining the True Sword sect, Chu Mu thought about it and decided that he would be the old ancestor of the True Sword sect. With his strength and identity, it would be more than enough for him to be the old ancestor of the True Sword sect. Since their master had joined, Mo Baiyun, Yang Yuchen, and Ling Fengshao naturally joined the True Sword sect as well. The three of them temporarily became the elders of the True Sword sect. The three of them didn't have any objections. They just wanted to see their master join. As disciples, if they didn't join, it would be unreasonable. However, that was their own freedom. Chu Mu was going to leave, but the Heaven Sword Saint wouldn't go with him. He still needed to stay here and deter the sea tribes. If he left, the 5 Saint Masters of the human race would become 4. Their power would be weakened immediately. Who knew what would happen? Mo Baiyun and Yang Yuchen also stayed. They only said that they would visit the True Sword sect in the future. However, Ling Fengshao hadn't entered the mainland yet. Thus, he went with Chu Mu. It was an urgent matter. They couldn't go to other islands. If they took a large passenger spaceship, it would undoubtedly take a lot of time. Thus, the Heaven Sword Saint took out a precious spaceship, the Extreme Blade, and lent it to Chu Mu for the time being. The Extreme Blade was extraordinary as it could be treasured by the Heaven Sword Saint. The Extreme Peak had a detailed map of the ocean, allowing Chu Mu to pilot the flying ship without getting lost. This was even rarer in the blue ocean. As expected, the speed of the Extreme Blade shocked Chu Mu. If he compared it to the Purple Thunderbolt, it would be like comparing the moon to the Firefly. There was no comparison at all. The Extreme Blade was too fast. Even though Chu Mu had comprehended the unity of man and ship, he was still shocked when he started it. He had a feeling that he couldn't control it. Fortunately, he adjusted in time and slowed down. He first familiarized himself with it, then slowly increased it. Finally, he was able to master it. However, some subtle changes were still hard to master in a short time. It was unbelievably fast. It was so fast that even the eyes of a high-level saint couldn't catch it. In the blink of an eye, the Heaven Sword Island was left far behind and disappeared. Inside the Extreme Blade, Chu Mu controlled the spaceship with full concentration. He didn't dare to be distracted at all. He had no choice. It was too fast. He had to do this. Subconsciously, he tried his best. Many islands flew past. If one looked down, they would look like specks in the sea. 5 days. In just 5 days, Chu Mu saw the inland and approached it at an unimaginable speed. Not long after, the Extreme Blade finally entered the inland. Without any hesitation, it flew towards the True Sword sect. Calculating the time, it had been almost 2 months since the start of the Myriad sect meeting. Chu Mu didn't know if it was still going on or had ended. Therefore, he had to return to the True Sword sect to check on the situation. A few days later, the Extreme Blade appeared above the True Sword sect and landed quickly. Chu Mu immediately appeared. He scanned with his divine sense, but didn't find Elder Yunfeng and Yang Zhen. It seems that they haven't returned yet. Chu Mu's divine sense locked onto Elder Yunhe. Yunhe greets the sect master. Yunhe was summoned and immediately bowed to Chu Mu. Elder Yunhe, This is the new elder of the True Sword sect. His surname is Ling and his name is Fengxiao. Chu Mu first introduced Ling Fengxiao to the side, but didn't mention his background or cultivation strength. Ling Fengxiao also retracted his aura. When Elder Yun he saw this, he only felt that he was unfathomable and didn't think that he was a shockingly talented sword saint. Elder Ling, this is Elder Yun he. He's in charge of punishment. Chu Mu also introduced him to Ling Fengxiao. Elder Yun. Ling Fengxiao nodded slightly. Elder Ling. Yun he clasped his hands. Elder Yun he. Did Elder Yun Feng and Elder Yang Zhen bring their disciples to the Myriad Sect meeting? Chu Mu went straight to the point after the introduction. More than a month ago, Elder Yun Feng and Elder Yang Zhen brought 10 core disciples, 10 elite disciples, and 10 inner disciples of the sect to Azure Wave Imperial City to participate in the Myriad Sect Grand Meeting. Elder Yun he concluded with a single sentence. Yes, I'll bring Elder Ling to the Kanglan Imperial City now. I'll leave the sect matters to Elder Yun he for now. If there's anything you can't decide, you can ask the Grand Elder. Chu Mu said. The moment he finished speaking, he went back into the extreme peak. Ling Fengxiao also quickly went in. The extreme peak was activated and quickly rose into the air. Then, it turned into a stream of light and disappeared. Where's the flying ship? Elder Yun he was originally watching, but suddenly, the flying ship disappeared as if it had never appeared. It was so fast that he thought he was dreaming. He couldn't believe it. The Kanglan Imperial City wasn't small, but it couldn't be compared to the Blue Ocean. Therefore, the extreme peak approached the Kanglan Imperial City in just 2 days. Stopping in front of the Imperial City, Chu Mu quickly put away the extreme peak. He looked a little pained. The extreme peak's speed was indeed unbelievably fast. The amount of energy it consumed was also shocking. From Blue Ocean back to the inland, to True Sword Sect, and then to Kanglan Imperial City, the amount of yuan pills Chu Mu had invested was shocking. It could be said that he had used up more than 60% of the origin pills he had obtained recently. In other words, without the wealth he had accumulated from killing the Sea Tribe, he probably wouldn't have been able to fly the extreme peak for half a day. He couldn't help but sigh. Although the extreme peak was good, it had to be used carefully. The Azure Billow Royal City was the largest and most prosperous capital city of the Royal Empire. Naturally, it had many aspects that surpassed other cities. Not only that, the walls of the Azure Billow Royal City exuded an ancient aura, as well as an aura of majesty and grandeur. After all, this was the foundation of the Kanglan Imperial City. It was the place where the Emperor of the Kanglan Imperial City resided. Generations of people had been affected and refined by the Imperial Qi. After putting away the extreme peak, Chu Mu and Ling Fengxiao quickly headed for the Imperial City Gate.